Kor opened his eyes and didn't recognize the ceiling. Dark beams, the smell of damp straw and something sour. His body wouldn't obey him. Every muscle burned as if it had been chewed and spat out. He tried to raise his arm and couldn't. His fingers twitched, but his arm remained lying there as if it belonged to someone else. Light fell from somewhere to the side, dim, yellow, a candle stub or a splinter of wood. His eyes adjusted slowly. He was lying on something hard, straw beneath his back, a rag instead of a blanket. The cold seeped to his bones. Dalton Reyes tried to take a deeper breath and coughed. His throat was dry, a taste of iron and rot in his mouth. He tried to sit up and the world swayed. The walls swam. Nausea hit his stomach and he fell back onto the straw. A sound came from somewhere nearby. Footsteps, light, cautious. Someone approached. A woman's face leaned over him. Thin, prominent cheekbones, eyes dark and empty like someone who had long since given up hope.
Her lips were chapped. She whispered something. Her voice was quiet and hoarse. She said he'd been tossing and turning in a fever for 3 days, and she thought he wouldn't come back. A girl was clinging to her skirt. Small, so thin that Dalton could see every rib beneath her shirt. Big eyes looked up at him from below. No tears, no expression. The eyes of a child who had forgotten how to cry. The woman told the girl not to come near because her father wasn't feeling well. Dalton looked at them and didn't understand a thing. The last thing he remembered was the roar of the helicopter and a shout over the radio. Then a blow. Heat. Darkness. He shielded the team with his body when shrapnel pierced his bulletproof vest. He was definitely dead. He remembered how he died. The cold in his legs crept upward and the sounds faded away. The last thing he heard was someone's voice shouting his call sign. He died. And now he was lying on straw, and a stranger's woman and a stranger's child were looking at him. The memory hit him like a blow. Not his memory, a stranger's. It gushed into his head in a single minute, and he shut his eyes against the pain. Kor. His name is Kor. A hunter, 30 years old. The village of Ashmore. Wife Mara, daughter Ren, 6 years old. He went into the woods 4 days ago, and 2 men from the neighborhood brought him back, half dead, a laceration on his side. Something from the woods had attacked him on the trail. The body's memory delivered fragments of images, trails, the scent of pine needles and rot, shadows between the trees, a roar in the darkness. Dalton processed the information as intelligence, quickly, without panic. For 12 years, he had been taught to wake up in an unfamiliar place and make do with what he had. A different body, a different world. The Middle Ages, by all accounts. The weapons on the wall were an axe and a knife. No electricity, no running water, no communication. A woman and a child. Hungry. He could see it. Mara's cheeks were sunken. Her collarbones jutted out from under her shirt. Ren stood next to her mother and didn't move. Children in famine zones are always like that. Quiet, saving every movement. Dalton had seen this in 3 countries, and every time the sight was worse than a bullet. He forced himself to sit down. The world swayed again, but he held his ground. The wound on his side burned. Someone had bandaged it with a rag, a dirty one. He looked at Mara. She looked at him warily. He asked if there was water in the house. She nodded and brought a mug, a clay one. The water was murky. He drank. It tasted of earth and something musty. Not bad. It had been worse. He asked if there was any food. Mara looked away. That was her answer. He looked around the room. One room. A hearth. A pot. A shelf on the wall with a couple of bowls. Nothing else. He looked at his daughter. Rin was standing by the wall, staring at him without blinking. He told her everything would be okay. She didn't react. Hungry children don't believe words. They believe in food. Dalton stood up. His legs were shaking. Kor's body was weak, emaciated, but it was alive, and that was what mattered. He took a step toward the door. Mara jerked toward him and said he shouldn't get up. He replied that he needed to go out. She didn't argue. He pushed the door open and stepped outside. The light hit his eyes. Gray. Dull. The sky was overcast with clouds. The cold air stung his lungs. He stood in the doorway and looked out. The village of Ashmore lay before him. A dozen or so houses, half of them leaning. A few burnt-out shells.
a palisade of sharpened logs all around. The logs were old, rotten at the bottom, gaps in the fence that a dog could crawl through. The gate was held up by ropes instead of hinges. The operator inside began counting automatically.
80 souls, according to Core's memory. At most, 20 men fit for battle. Their weapons were axes and pitchforks. The walls were rotten. Food supply? 0. 2 weeks until snow. Beyond the walls, a forest, the dark grove. The trees began 100 meters from the palisade, tall, black. The trunks stood like a solid wall. Even in the daytime, it was dark between them. Core's memory told him that things lurked there from which there was no escape. Every full moon, creatures emerged from that darkness, too fast for wolves, too smart for beasts. Over 7 years, they had devoured 3 guards from the 3 supply convoys sent in, and the kingdom had Ashmore from the maps. The Hunters Guild had declared the place a black zone. No one would come. No one would help. Dalton stood in the doorway, breathing in the cold air. The wind carried the scent of the forest, pine needles, wet earth, else. Something animalistic. The operator inside him was assessing the situation. Enemy unknown. Territory unexplored. Resources 0. Allies 0. Mission survival. Targets to protect 2. A woman and a child. Time limit 2 weeks until the snow. He turned around. Through the doorway, he saw Mara. She was standing by the hearth, holding something in her hands. He looked closer. A leather belt. She was going to boil it. He'd seen this before. In besieged cities, people boiled leather when food ran out. That meant things were really bad. Ren sat on the floor by the wall, quiet as a mouse. Dalton Reyes had lived through 12 years of war. He had slept in the filth of 3 continents. He had killed people for his country's money, lost friends, and woken up in a sweat from his dreams. He had died covering for his men. And now, he stood in the doorway of a stranger's house in a strange world, watching a woman boiling a belt and a girl who hadn't eaten meat in a month. He wasn't afraid. He was clear. In 2 days, that girl would have hot meat. It wasn't a promise. It was an order to himself. He stepped back into the house, closed the door, walked over to the wall where the axe hung and took it down. Checked the blade with his finger. Dull. He looked at the knife next to it. Rusty, but the steel was still alive. He sat down by the hearth and began sharpening the knife on a stone from the masonry. Mara was watching him. He could feel her gaze. She wanted to say something, but remained silent. Ren crawled closer and sat down beside him. She didn't snuggle up. She just sat there, like a little animal that approaches the fire, but doesn't trust it yet. Core sharpened the on, rhythmically, monotonously, familiar movements. His body remembered how to do it. Core's hands did the work while Dalton's mind made a plan. First, weapons. A knife and an axe are the bare minimum. He needs a stake, a sharp one, a long one. Tomorrow. Second, a trap. A noose made of rope on an animal trail. Core's memory knew where the trails were. Dalton knew how to set traps for live prey. Third, reconnaissance. Head into the woods, assess the threats, mark the territory. Fourth, food. Anything. Meat. By tomorrow evening, this house will smell of cooked meat, or he's no cook. He raised his head and looked at Mara. Told her he was going into the woods tomorrow. She turned pale, said they'd only just brought him back from there, half dead. He replied that this time, everything would be different. She didn't believe him. He could see it. She looked at him as if he were a sick man raving. Never mind. Tomorrow she'll believe him, when she sees the carcass on the sled. Core lay back down on the straw. He closed his eyes. The wound on his side throbbed. His body was weak, but his mind was working. Dalton Reyes was drawing up a plan of action. The goal? Meat. Tools, a knife and a homemade trap. The operation zone? A forest trail 2 kilometers to the north. Core's memory recalled this trail. Wild boars used to walk along it to the watering hole. Operation time? Dawn. Risks? Unknown wildlife and a weak body. Acceptable risk level? High. Reason for acceptance? The child hadn't eaten meat in a month.
He lay there and listened as Mara tucked Ren in. Quiet footsteps, the rustle of fabric. The girl didn't make a sound. Children fall asleep quickly when they're hungry. The body conserves everything. Mara lay down next to him. She didn't snuggle up. She lay on the edge, the habit of a person who hasn't expected warmth from the one next to them in a long time. Kor's memory told him why. The local Kor had been drinking for the past year. A lot. Whatever he could get his hands on. Moonshine made from roots. Brew. He drank and sat by the wall and didn't go into the forest because he was afraid. Mara had grown accustomed to a husband who had given up. Dalton lay in the darkness and stared at the ceiling. A stranger's body. A stranger's wife. A stranger's child. A stranger's world. But the hunger is real. And the forest beyond the wall is real. And the girl who covers her bowl with her hand because she's afraid it will be taken away is real too. An operator doesn't need to love to protect. An operator needs an order, and he gave that order to himself. Kor got up before dawn. Darkness still hung outside the window. His body creaked. Every joint made itself known. The wound on his side had tightened, but it throbbed with a dull ache when he moved. He sat down on the straw and listened. Mara was breathing evenly. Ren lay next to her, curled up in a ball, a small, warm bundle under the rags. He stood up slowly, trying not to make a sound. He put on what he'd found by the door, a jacket made of coarse leather, patched, thin. Not for winter, but better than nothing. The boots were worn out but intact. He took the knife, sharpened yesterday. Now it cut. He tested the blade with his fingernail. Good. He left the axe behind. Heavy. Kor's body wouldn't be able to carry it on a long march with an axe. Not now. Instead, he took the rope. He'd found it last night on the nail by the door. Thin, worn, but strong. He coiled it up and tucked it into his belt. Then he pulled a pole out of the corner. Long, straight, leaning against the wall. He sat down by the threshold and began sharpening the end with the knife. Shavings fell onto the dirt floor. The stake was rough, but sharp. That would do. He wasn't going to fight. He was going to hunt. The difference is that a hunter doesn't meet his prey face to face. He waits. He prepares. He strikes when the prey is already dead, but doesn't know it yet. Dalton checked his gear. Knife, rope, stake, a canteen of water. Murky, but drinkable. That's it. The bare minimum. He'd gone with less on special ops before. He stepped outside. The air hit his face. Cold. Damp. It smelled of frozen earth and smoke. Someone in the village had already lit a fire. A thin column of smoke rose above one of the roofs. Kor walked toward the gate. The palisade loomed gray in the pre-dawn mist. The logs were wet with dew. No one was at the gate. No guard, no sentry. A village that doesn't post sentries is a village that has surrendered. He walked through the gate, rope loops instead of a lock. One pull and the gate was open. Any beast with a brain bigger than a walnut could get through. He remembered that. Later. Right now, he had another task. The forest began 100 paces. The field between the stockade and the trees was empty. Scorched grass, bare earth. No bushes, no cover. A good firing zone if there were anything to shoot with. He walked across the field and looked at the wall of trees ahead. Dark forest. The trees were tall, the trunks were thick. The canopies intertwined overhead and blocked out the light. Even now, at dawn, a thick shadow stood between the trunks. Kor's memory knew this forest. Trails, ravines, streams, watering holes. Places to avoid. Dalton superimposed his grid over this map. Approaches, vantage points, escape routes. Natural depressions where prey could be herded. Narrow passages where a trap would work best. He entered the forest. The scent changed immediately. Pine needles, moss, dampness, and something else. Sweetish, rotten. Not carrion, something alive. The scent of a large beast, or what they consider a beast here. Kor walked along the trail, narrow, an animal trail. Trampled grass, hoofprints, boars. Kor's memory confirmed it. This trail led to a stream. The boars went to drink before dawn. If he made it in time, he could set a snare along the way. He moved quietly. He stepped on his toes, shifted his weight smoothly, avoided dry branches, controlled his breathing. Core's body didn't know these movements, but his muscles obeyed. Dalton led the way. The body followed. 500 meters along the trail, then a turn. The trail narrowed between two fallen tree trunks. The perfect spot, a natural funnel. The beast would go between the trunks, because going around would be too far. Here. He crouched down and began to work. A noose made of rope. A slip knot that would tighten under the weight. Dalton had tied such knots, in the dark, in the mud, in the rain, on 4 continents. Core's fingers were rough and uncooperative, but the knot held. He tied one end to a fallen tree trunk. He camouflaged the noose with leaves and dirt. He checked the tension. Good. Next, a stake. He drove a sharpened pole into the ground at an angle next to the trap. If the animal lunges forward from the noose, it will hit it. If it lunges backward, the noose will tighten further. Primitive, but it works. Special forces don't turn their noses up at the primitive. The primitive is reliable. He moved 20 meters up the trail, found a spot behind a bush, lay down, pressed himself into the ground, knife in hand, and waited. Waiting is 90% of any operation. Dalton had waited in ambush for 16 hours without moving. A wild boar would arrive sooner. The forest was alive around him. Birds began to wake up, small ones. Somewhere in the distance, a woodpecker was tapping. The wind rustled the treetops. Normal sounds. The forest didn't sense any threat yet. That's good. An hour had passed. The light grew stronger. Gray. Diffuse. He could see farther between the trunks. Core lay motionless. His breathing was steady. His heartbeat was calm. His body was freezing, but he controlled the shivering. Habit. Then he heard it. A crunch. Heavy. Rhythmic. Hooves on the frozen ground. He didn't move. Only his eyes shifted toward the trail. A boar. Large. Dark fur. Fangs protruding from its lower jaw. 120 kilograms, maybe more. It walked confidently along the trail. The master, used to walking here every morning, unafraid. The last thing those who weren't afraid ever saw was the ceiling of a field hospital tent. The boar passed 20 meters past Core. He didn't notice. The wind was blowing from the animal toward him. The scent didn't give him away. The boar approached the narrow passage between the tree trunks. He stepped into the snare. His front leg went in perfectly. The weight of his body pulled the rope tight. The noose grabbed the leg above the hoof. The boar jerked. It snorted. The rope tightened. The beast lunged forward and rammed its ribs against the stake. Not deep, but painful. It bellowed and recoiled backwards. The noose tightened even more. Core stood up, quickly, quietly. He approached from the side. The boar thrashed in the trap. Powerful, dangerous. Its tusks could rip through a thigh in a single motion. Dalton didn't approach from the front. He came up from behind. The boar spun around, but its leg and the noose held it back. Core struck with his knife, precisely, under the shoulder blade, deeply. The blade pierced the heart. The boar twitched. It wheezed. Its legs buckled. It fell on its side. 2 more gasps. Then silence. Core stood over the carcass. Steam rose from the wound into the cold air. His hands were covered in blood. The knife was covered in blood. That was fine. He crouched down. He inspected the carcass. A healthy beast. Plenty of meat. Enough for the family for a week. Maybe more. He cut the noose, pulled out the steak, began butchering right there on the spot. The knife was sharp after a good sharpening. The hide was tough, but he managed. Gutted it. Took everything edible. Liver, heart, kidneys. When you're hungry, there's no such thing as waste. He tied the carcass with a rope and dragged it along the trail. It was heavy. Core's body wasn't built for that kind of weight. The wound on his side flared up and burned. He dragged on, meter by meter. Stopped. Breathed. Dragged again. The operator knows how to endure. Pain is a signal, not a command. He emerged from the forest 2 hours later. A field, a palisade, a gate. An old man stood by the gate. Thin, hunchbacked, long gray hair. eyes sharp despite his age. He looked at Kor and at the carcass behind him. The old man said nothing. He just looked, for a long time. Then he stepped aside to let him through. Kor dragged the carcass through the gate, down the village street, past the houses. People came out onto their doorsteps. They watched, silently. A woman with 2 children clinging to her skirt, an old woman with an empty pot, a man with sunken cheeks. Everyone was looking at the meat. Kor dragged the carcass to his house, dropped it at the threshold, sat down on the ground, breathing. Sweat ran down his face despite the cold. The door opened. Mara came out. She saw the carcass. She froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She stood there looking at the dead boar on her doorstep and couldn't believe it. Kor told her to start a fire and put the pot on. She didn't move. He repeated himself. Then she nodded and went inside. He could hear her fiddling by the hearth. Her hands were shaking. He could hear the flint striking. Once, twice, 3 times. A spark flew. The fire caught. Kor butchered the carcass by the house. He carried the best cuts inside. Mara cut the meat. She tossed it into the pot of water. The water came to a boil. The smell spread through the house. The smell of cooking meat. Ren came out of the corner. She stood by the pot and watched. Her eyes were huge. Her nostrils flared. She didn't say a word. She just stood there and waited. Mara took out a bowl. She put the meat in it. She poured in the broth. She set it in front of Ren. The girl sat down on the floor. She picked up a piece of meat with her fingers. She put it in her mouth. She chewed slowly. With her other hand, she covered the bowl. She pressed it close to herself, so no one would take it away. Kor watched this, 6 years old. A 6-year-old child covers her food with her hand because she knows the food could run out at any moment. Mara stood by the wall and turned away. Her shoulders shook. She cried silently, so her daughter wouldn't see. Kor went out into the yard. He stood by the stockade. His hands were covered in boar's blood. His clothes were covered in blood. He stood and looked at the forest. The dark forest stood like a wall, silent, dark. He stood there for 10 minutes. He didn't move. Inside, it was quiet. No rage, no pity, no fear. Only clarity. He knows what to do. He knows how to do it. He will do this every day until this girl stops covering her bowl with her hand. Kor went back inside. He washed his hands in a bucket. He sat down by the hearth. He took a rope and began to weave a new noose. Ren had finished eating. The bowl was empty. The girl sat on the floor, full and warm. Her eyes were closing. She fell asleep right there, curled up on the floor by the hearth. Mara approached. She covered her with a rag. Then she sat down across from Kor. She looked at him. She had to. She asked how he'd done it. He replied that he'd set a trap. She said he'd never set traps before. He'd hunted with a spear. He'd gone head-on after the beast, and every time he'd come back empty-handed or wounded. Kor said nothing. Then he said that a fever changes a lot of things. She didn't believe him. He'd seen it, but she didn't argue. The meat in the pot was real. Meat doesn't lie. Kor had woven the trap, knot by knot. Tomorrow he would set 10 of them, on different trails, block all the approaches to the watering hole. In a week they would have enough meat to start smoking it. In a month they would have a stockpile. He told this to Mara, quietly, calmly, like at a briefing. 10 traps tomorrow, a smokehouse in a week, a stockpile in a month. She listened. Her eyes were shining, not from tears, from something else. Kor didn't bother to figure out what. He was weaving a trap. For the next 5 days, Kor worked. He went into the woods before dawn and returned around noon. Every day, the same routine. Check the traps, remove the catch, set new ones. Move the ones that didn't work to other trails. By the 3rd day, he had 12 snares set on 6 different trails. 2 by the stream, 3 on the northern trail to the watering hole, 4 at the animal crossings between the ravines, 3 at the approaches to the berry thickets that hadn't frozen over yet. He didn't catch just anything. Wild boars were his main prey. Heavy, meaty, fatty before winter. He caught some hares, small, but meat is meat. Once a deer got caught in a snare.
a young one, 70 kilograms, enough meat for 5 days for the family. Kor dragged it through the woods for an hour and a half. The wound on its side had split open. He bandaged it with a strip of fabric from his shirt and continued. At home, he butchered it. The bull in the yard. He hung the hides on a rope. He cut the meat and carried it inside. Mara cooked. Broth, boiled meat, liver, kidneys. Nothing went to waste. The bones went into the pot for stock. The hides were hung out to dry. Dalton remembered how to make pemmican, dried meat mixed with fat. It keeps for months. He explained it to Mara. She listened carefully. Her hands worked quickly. She was a countrywoman and knew how to work with her hands. She just needed to be shown. By the 5th day, meat was hanging in Kor's house, on ropes under the ceiling, strips of dried meat, pieces of smoked meat in a makeshift smokehouse that Kor had built out of stones and clay against the back wall of the house. Smoke rose from the alder branches. The smell was so strong that Ren sat by the smokehouse for hours, breathing it in. On the 6th day, Heder came to see Kor. The old man appeared at the doorway in the morning, quietly, without warning. He stood and watched as Kor sharpened a new stake. Then he sat down beside him, silently. He sat there for a minute, without saying a word. Kor kept working. He waited. Heder spoke first. He said he knew every hunter in Ashmore for the past 50 years. He said that Kor had gone into the woods a half-dead drunkard and returned a different man. Kor replied that the fever changes people. Heder looked at him long and hard and said that fever doesn't teach you how to set traps that no one in these parts has ever seen. Kor said nothing. Heder didn't press the issue. Instead, he said that in the village there were 2 lads with nothing to do but wait for death. Garrick and Tobin, 19 and 17, both fatherless. Their fathers had died in the forest 2 years ago. The boys were strong but dim-witted. No one had taught them anything. Heder said that if Kor really could do what he'd shown over the past week, the boys would be worth training. Kor thought it over. 2 fighters, young, untrained, but their bodies are healthy and fierce, the foundation for a squad.
In the Special Forces, he trained recruits. He turned country boys into soldiers in 3 months. Here, the task is simpler. Not soldiers, hunters. Ambush tactics, traps, silence, patience. He told Hedar to have the boys come tomorrow at dawn. Hedar nodded and left as quietly as he had appeared. The next morning, Garrick and Tobin stood by Kor's house. Garrick was taller, broad-shouldered, dark hair, a sullen face, large hands, used to hard work. Tobin was younger, thinner, quick, shifty eyes, nervous. Both looked at Kor with suspicion. They knew the old Kor, a drunk, a loser. Now someone else stood before them, and they could feel it even if they couldn't explain it. Kor didn't make any speeches. He told them to follow him. He led them into the forest. The first lesson was simple. Walk quietly. Garrick plowed through the underbrush like a bull, every step a crunch, every movement a crack. Tobin was slightly better, but still made noise. Kor stopped them, demonstrated. Foot on the toes. Shift weight smoothly. Look for soft spots. Moss, grass. Avoid dry branches. Control your breathing. The guys tried. They did a poor job. Kor made them walk 200 meters along the trail 10 times in a row. By the 5th time, Tobin was starting to get it. By the 10th time, Garrick had stopped snapping every other branch. Progress. Slow, but real. Second lesson. Observation. Kor sat them down by the trail and told them to watch. Don't move. Don't speak. Watch and listen. An hour. They sat for an hour. Garrick fidgeted for the first 20 minutes, then quieted down. Tobin froze immediately. A good sign. After an hour, Kor asked what they had seen. Garrick saw a bird and a squirrel. Tobin saw a bird, a squirrel, a trail on the path, and a spider on a branch. Kor said that 2 hares had passed along the trail during that hour, both within 20 paces. The boys hadn't noticed them. They started looking at Kor as if he were a sorcerer. He said it wasn't sorcery, but attention. Lesson 3. Traps. Kor demonstrated a noose. He showed them how to tie a knot, how to choose a spot, how to camouflage it, how to check the tension. Garrick tied the knots roughly, but tightly. Tobin quickly, but sloppily. Kor corrected them, patiently, like an instructor. No yelling, no anger. Clear instructions. Repeat. One more time. Better. One more time. Good. Every day the following week, the guys showed up at dawn. Kor led them into the woods. They learned to move silently, to set traps, to read tracks, to determine wind direction, to choose a position for an ambush. Garrick was slow but stubborn. Once shown something, he remembered it forever. Tobin was quick but impatient. He wanted results right away. Kor knew this type. They used to wear such guys down with patience and training. He gave Tobin the longest ambushes, 3 hours of stillness. The guy suffered but endured. By the end of the week, Kor had 2 students who could walk through the woods without raising a flock of birds. That was something. On the 8th day, they checked the traps together. A boar was caught in a snare on the northern trail, a medium-sized one, about 80 pounds. Kor showed them how to approach, from the side, quietly, a knife thrust under the shoulder blade. Garrick watched closely. Tobin turned pale but didn't look away. Kor dragged out the carcass and butchered it. He gave a third to Garrick, a third to Tobin. He kept a third for himself. The boys carried the meat home. Garrick walked in silence. Tobin smiled. The first meat he'd ever hunted himself, even if it was in a trap, even if Kor had killed it. But he'd been part of it. In the village, they were met with stares. 3 hunters with meat. Not 1, 3. That was new. At dinner, Mara told Kor that people in the village were talking about him. Some say he's made a deal with the forest spirits. Others said he was a sorcerer. Still others were simply jealous. After all, only his family and the 2 boys had meat. The rest were still eating roots and boiling hides. Kor listened. He knew this was a problem. A well-fed person next to a hungry one is a target. Envy kills more silently than a forest beast, but just as surely. He needed to feed the village, not out of kindness, out of strategy. Hungry people are useless. Hungry people are dangerous. Well-fed people work. Well-fed people listen. He decided to expand the operation. More traps, more trails, to teach not 2, but 10. Every trained hunter means meat for 3 more families. In a month, the whole village will have food. In 2 months, there will be a stockpile. The next day, Kor gathered the village men at the gate. 11 men showed up. 6 of them were able to go into the forest. The rest were too weak or too old. Kor explained it simply. He could teach them to hunt without getting killed. Traps, ambushes, no risk. Meat for their families. Whoever wants to can come tomorrow at dawn. 6 nodded. One man named Tor said that Kor just wanted to be in charge. Kor replied that he wanted his daughter to survive the winter, and if that meant all the village children had to survive the winter too, so be it. Tor fell silent. From behind them stepped forward the village elder, Bram, a large man with a stern face, 56 years old, a former blacksmith, hands like shovels, tired eyes. He looked at Kor and said that the village had survived 7 years without his traps. Kor replied that the village hadn't survived but had been dying, and that in 2 weeks the snow would fall, and if they didn't start preparing now, only half would survive until spring. Bram clenched his teeth. He knew Kor was right. Everyone knew. But accepting that a drunkard hunter had suddenly become a savior was hard. Kor didn't press the issue. He said that tomorrow he was going into the woods, and whoever wanted to could go with him. He turned and left. Mara was waiting by the door. She had heard the conversation. She said Bram wouldn't forgive him. Kor replied that he didn't need Bram's forgiveness. He needed meat in every home before the snow fell. That evening, Kor sat by the hearth and drew on the ground with a stick. A map. The layout of the traps. Trails. Watering holes. Danger zones. Dalton was drawing up an operational map of the area. Wren crawled over and sat next to him. She looked at the lines on the ground. She asked what it was. Kor said it was the forest. She asked why he was drawing the forest. He said so he'd know where to go and where not to go. She thought for a moment and said that Mom says you can't go into the forest at all. Kor replied that you can go into the forest if you know how. Wren fell silent. Then she said she wanted him to teach her, too. Kor looked at his daughter, 6 years old, skinny, big eyes, serious as an adult. He said that when she got older, he'd teach her. She nodded, seriously, as if they'd made a pact. Mara watched them from the hearth. Kor caught her gaze. There was something in it he hadn't seen before. Not fear, not distrust. Something warm. He looked away and returned to the map. The operator doesn't know how to deal with warmth. The operator knows how to deal with maps. Snow fell on the 10th day. Kor woke up to the silence. The forest beyond the walls was silent. No birds could be heard. He stepped outside and saw a white expanse, a thin layer, the first. Others would follow. 2 days ago, he had set the last batch of traps, 26 snares on 14 trails. 6 men from the village had gone out into the woods with him yesterday and set 10 more of their own. Rough, clumsy, but they worked. Garrick and Tobin set them best of all. They'd already been out in the woods on their own. Not far, not deep, but they'd been out. The first snow changed everything. Tracks in the snow read like a book. That's a plus. But his tracks are visible too. That's a minus. The animals are changing their routes. The trails shift. We need to reconfigure the net. Kor returned to the house. Mara was already up. She was simmering a broth from bones. The scent was faint but warm. Ren was asleep, wrapped in hides. Boar hides. Mara had tanned them over the past week. She has skilled hands. The leather turned out rough but warm. Kor told Mara he was leaving for a long time, until evening. He needed to check all the traps after the snow and reset them. She nodded. She didn't argue. In 10 days, she'd gotten used to it. Her husband went into the woods and came back with meat. A new order. Strange, but effective. Kor went out. Garrick and Tobin were waiting at the gate, silently, knives and spears in their hands. They already knew. Snow meant work. 3 hunters entered the woods. Snow on the branches. Silence. The world had turned black and white. Dark trunks. White ground. The first trap on the southern trail. Empty. But a track nearby. Large. Kor crouched down. He looked. Not a boar. Not a deer. Something else. A paw print. 4 toes. Long claws, pressed deep into the snow. A heavy beast. A memory flickered in Kor's mind. He knew that track. A night stalker. That's what they called them in the village, creatures that came out on the full moon. But the full moon was still 8 days away, and the track was fresh. Kor looked at Garrick. He saw the track too. He turned pale. Tobin stood nearby, confused. Kor pointed to the prints. He explained quietly that this was no ordinary beast. Tobin looked at the tracks, then at the forest around them. His hand tightened around the knife. Good. Fear is a normal reaction. It's bad when there's no fear. Kor made his decision quickly. They wouldn't follow that track. Not now. Not the 3 of them. Not with knives. He wasn't here for heroics. He was here for meat. They skirted the southern sector and headed toward the northern trails. 3 out of 5 traps had worked. 2 hares and a boar. A good day. Kor showed the guys how to gut the game on the spot so they'd have less weight to carry. Garrick handled the knife with confidence. Tobin still grimaced at the sight of the entrails, but his hands didn't shake. Progress. On the way back, Kor took a detour. He went to the western edge of the forest. The trees were sparser here. The light filtered through more strongly. An old oak stood in the clearing. Huge. A trunk 3 arms width around. The ground beneath it was trampled. Not by animals. By people. Kor's memory knew this place. Heder used to come here. He gathered herbs. Something grew here that wasn't found anywhere else. Kor remembered the place. Later. They returned to the village by noon. They divided the meat. 1/3 for the boys' families, 1/3 for Kor. 1/3 for the communal pot that Mara was cooking for those who were completely weakened, the elderly and children without parents. There were 4 such children in the village, orphans. 3 boys and a girl. The oldest was 10, the youngest was 4. Their parents had died, some in the forest, some from illness, some from starvation. Old woman Nella looked after them, but she could barely walk herself. Kor had noticed them on the first day, skinny shadows by the wall of the house, empty eyes, just like wrens before the meat. He started bringing them food on the 3rd day. Not much, bones with meat, broth, offal, whatever the family didn't finish. Mara didn't argue. She silently added a portion to the pot. After lunch, Kor went to see Heder. The old man lived on the edge of the village. The house was small, sturdy. The walls were plastered with clay, clean, dry. Bundles of dried herbs hung on the walls. The smell was bitter and sharp. Heder sat by the fire, sorting through some roots. Kor sat down across from him. He asked about the creatures, straight out, No beating around the bush. What they were, where they came from, how many there were. Heder looked at him for a long time. Then he began to speak. He explained that the forest hadn't always been like this. 30 years ago, the Dark Grove was an ordinary forest. Dangerous, but ordinary. Wolves, bears, boars. Hunters would go out and come back. Then, 7 years ago, something changed. The beasts became different, more aggressive, larger. Some started to look wrong. Too many teeth, claws that were too long, eyes that glowed in the dark. They started coming to the village, first one by one, then in groups, always on the full moon. 3 convoys of the royal guard went in and never came back. After that, Ashmore was wiped off the maps. Kor asked what Heder thought had caused the change. The old man fell silent, for a long time. Then he said one word. Skinny. Kor asked what that was. Heder said it was a legend. Or maybe not. Old hunters used to say that deep in the forest there is a place where no beast goes. A dead zone. No birds, no insects, the stench of rot that comes from nothing visible. And something lives there. Something ancient. Something was in the forest long before the village. It slept, and 7 years ago it woke up, and the forest went mad. Kor listened. He filtered. Legends are intelligence mixed with garbage. The task is to separate fact from fear. Fact 1. 7 years ago, the fauna changed. Fact 2. The changes are coming from the depths of the forest. Fact 3. There is a specific area that even the mutated beasts avoid. Conclusion. The source of the problem is localized. It's not a curse on the entire forest. It's something specific in a specific place. And the specific can be found. And what is found can be killed. Not now. Later. First, winter. First, food. First, defense. Kor thanked Heder and left. On his way home, he stopped at the palisade. He examined it. Rotten logs at the bottom. Gaps. Warped sections. This isn't a wall. It's an illusion of a wall. Any creature bigger than a dog will get through. He began to calculate. The village perimeter is about 400 meters. The palisade runs the entire length, but a third of it is in a state of disrepair. It needs to be reinforced. A moat is needed, at least a shallow one, a meter and a half. That would be enough to slow the creature down as it approaches. Signal traps are needed. Tripwires with a noise element. Cans with stones on a rope. Primitive, but it works. The creature snags the rope. The cans clatter. The village wakes up. Time to prepare. He stood by the wall and saw everything that needed to be done. A defensive plan unfolded in his mind. Echeloned, 3 lines. The first, the ditch and the signal tripwires. The second, the palisade, reinforced and patched up. The third, riflemen's positions behind the stockade. Archers. There are bows in the village, bad ones, but there are some. Garrick used to shoot a bow. Kor's memory recalled that Garrick used to hunt with his father as a child. His father taught him to shoot. That's the foundation. You can build on it. Kor came home. Mara was feeding Ren. The girl ate slowly, but she no longer covered the bowl with her hand. Progress. Small. Huge. Kor sat down by the hearth. He took out a piece of charcoal and began drawing on a piece of leather. A map of the village. The perimeter. Positions. Mara asked what it was. He said it was a defense plan. She asked against whom. He said against whatever comes out of the forest in 8 days on the full moon. Mara froze. Full moon. Every resident of Ashmore knew what that word meant. Every full moon, someone died. Every full moon, the village locked itself in its homes and prayed. And every full moon, the prayers didn't help. Kor said that this time would be different. Mara looked at him. She wanted to believe. She couldn't. 7 years of fear aren't erased by 10 days of meat. Kor understood that. He wasn't asking for faith. He was asking for 8 days. The next morning, he gathered Garrick and Tobin and 6 men who were learning to hunt. 8 men. Kor explained the situation. The full moon was in a week. The creatures will come. It's been that way for 7 years. It'll be the same this time.
The difference is that this time, the village will be ready. He outlined the plan: a moat, tripwires, reinforcing the walls, positions. The men listened, eyes wide. They were used to hiding, not fighting. Kor said that hiding doesn't work anymore. Every full moon, people, so hiding doesn't protect them. He proposes another way. Prepare the terrain, slow the creatures down. Meet them not in houses behind flimsy doors, but on the walls behind a moat and traps. Garrick was the first to nod, then Tobin, then the rest.
Not everyone with conviction, but they all nodded. Work began that very day. Everyone dug the moat. Men, women, teenagers. The frozen ground was hard to break. Pickaxes and shovels dulled quickly. Kor showed them how to use wedges, how to loosen the soil, how to throw the dirt toward the village to build a rampart. Garrick worked for two, silently, stubbornly. Tobin darted between the groups and helped where he could. The moat grew slowly. On the first day, they dug 30 meters. Not deep, knee-deep, not much. But it was a start. At the same time, Kor was setting up tripwires. A rope stretched between stakes 20 meters from the ditch. On the rope, every 3 meters, bundles of dry branches and stones wrapped in rags. The creature touches the rope. The branches crack. The stones clatter. A signal. Bram arrived on the second day of work. He stood and looked at the ditch, at the people digging the frozen earth, at Kor, the commander. His face was stony. He walked up to Kor and said that he was leading the village to its doom, that the creatures would sense the trench and come back angrier, that you shouldn't anger the forest. Kor looked at him and asked how many people had died over the course of 7 full moons. Bram didn't answer. Kor said 23. Kor's memory held every name. 23 people in 7 years. Men, women, and children. He asked Bram if the strategy of hiding and praying had worked. Bram was silent. Kor said that if Bram didn't want to dig, he didn't have to. But he shouldn't get in the way of those who want to live. Bram left, heavy, angry, but silent. That evening, Kor sat at home. Ren was asleep. Mara was mending clothes. Silence. The fire crackled. Kor looked at his hands. Calloused, scraped, dirty. Kor's hands. A body he hadn't chosen. A life he didn't ask for. A family that wasn't his. Or maybe it was already his. He didn't know. Dalton Reyes died protecting strangers on orders from strangers. Kor lives protecting his own people by his own choice. The difference is enormous. Mara looked up from her sewing. She looked at him. She said he had changed. Kor asked in what way. She said that before he used to sit in the evenings and drink and be silent and not look her in the eye. And now he sits and thinks and makes plans and looks as if he sees something others cannot see. Kor said it was the fever. Mara shook her head. She said it wasn't the fever. Something had happened to him during those 3 days when he was tossing and turning in a delirium. Something had gone, and something had come. Kor said nothing. She was right. The broken drunk had gone. The operator had come. But it was impossible to explain. Mara didn't press the issue. She went back to her sewing. Then she said quietly that whatever the reason, she was glad he'd come back this way. Kor heard her. He didn't answer. He picked up a piece of leather with a map and continued marking positions for the archers. 6 days until the full moon. The trench was growing. Slowly. The frozen ground wouldn't give in without a fight. Every meter cost hours of work. Kor divided the men into 2 shifts. The morning shift dug the trench. The evening shift reinforced the palisade. Rotten logs were replaced with fresh ones cut at the edge of the forest. Not deep, the forest. Kor forbade anyone from going deeper than 100 meters from the edge. Not now. After the full moon. Garrick was chopping down trees. The axe in his hands sang. The guy was built for hard work. The trunks fell one after another. Tobin trimmed and sharpened the tops. The other men hauled the logs to the stockade and dug them in. In 4 days, they replaced 12 sections. They closed the largest gaps. The stockade began to look like a wall rather than a fence. By the fourth day, the moat stretched 120 meters, half a meter deep, a meter wide. Not enough for a real defense. But this isn't a fortification, it's a delay. The creature runs into the moat, stumbles, loses a second. A second is enough time for an archer on the wall. Kor placed stakes at the bottom of the ditch, sharpened, short. The beast won't die from them, but they'll pierce its paw. A wounded beast is slower. A slow beast is a dead beast. On the fifth day, Kor set to work on the archers. There were 7 bows in the village, 3 in working order, 4 falling. Kor inspected each one. He selected the 3 best. He tightened the bowstrings. He checked the arrows. The tips were blunt. He sharpened each one. 12 arrows. Not enough. He made 20 more from straight branches, without metal tips. The burnt ends sharpened with a knife. Useless against a human. Against a creature at a distance of 20 paces, they might be enough to slow it down. Garrick was the best shot. Kor tested him. He placed a sack of straw 30 paces away. Garrick hit 4 out of 5. At 20 paces, 5 out of 5. Good. Not a sniper, but serviceable. Tobin hit 3 out of 5 at 20 paces. Passable. 2 other guys shot. One was passable. The other was hopeless. 4 arrows. 12 standard arrows. 20 homemade ones. A defensive line at 400 meters. The operator in Kor's head did the math, and he didn't like the result. Tight. Very tight. But there was no choice. On the 6th day, Kor went into the forest alone. No guys, no hunters. Early. Still dark. He was following the tracks of the creature he'd seen 4 days ago. The tracks were old. Snow had covered them. But Kor found others, fresh ones. The same paw. 4 toes, long claws. The creature had walked along the southern trail. His trail. Checking the traps. Not getting caught in them. Bypassing them. Kor crouched by the tracks and thought. A beast that bypasses traps is a smart beast. Beasts don't bypass traps. They either fall into them or they don't. To bypass means to see, to understand. This isn't a beast. It's a predator with intelligence. Heder said the creatures were too smart to be beasts. Here's the proof. Kor followed the trail, carefully, quietly. The wind in his face. Good. The scent won't give him away. The trail led southeast, deeper into the forest. After half a kilometer, the path ended. Beyond that, windfall, fallen trunks, thick underbrush, dark. The scent grew stronger, animal, heavy, musk and something sour. Kor stopped. He listened. Silence. Complete. No birds, no rustling, no wind in the branches. Dead silence. A bad sign. When the forest falls silent, it means there's something nearby that the forest is hiding from. Kor didn't go any further. Not because because reconnaissance without preparation is suicide. He turned around and headed back. Quickly. Quietly. But quickly. Something cracked behind him. He didn't turn around. He didn't run. He walked at a steady pace, controlling his breathing. He listened. Another crack. Closer. Something was following him. Kor didn't speed up. A sudden movement provokes an attack. A predator goes after the one who runs. He walked. 200 meters. 300. The sound behind him faded. It had fallen behind, or was lying in wait. He came out onto a familiar path, walked another kilometer, emerged from the forest. A field. Snow. A stockade ahead. He turned around. A wall of trees. Dark. Silent. Nothing between the trunks. But Kor knew there was something there. Something was watching him and had decided not to attack. That's worse than an attack. A beast that attacks is predictable. A beast that watches and waits is truly dangerous. He returned to the village and went to Heder. He told him what he'd seen. Tracks. A creature that bypasses traps. Something that had been following him. Dead silence in the forest. Heder listened in silence. Then he said that before every full moon, they come out early. Scouts. Watching. Checking. Looking for weak spots. Kor asked who they were. Heder said the villagers call them night wanderers. The size of a large wolf but on 2 legs. Long front paws with claws. fast, smart. They hunt in packs. On a full moon, a pack comes, 5 or 6, sometimes more. Kor asked if anything larger had ever come. Heder said that 3 years ago, one had come. One. Huge. It tore down a section of the palisade and dragged off 2 people. Nothing larger has come since. Kor made a mental note. Night Wanderers. A pack of 5 or 6. Bipedal, claws, fast, smart. Pack tactics. The size of a large wolf. Something bigger once every few years. He returned to the defenses. 2 days until the full moon. A 150-meter moat, not around the entire village, only on the southern side, where they always came from. Kor's memory and Heder's stories matched. The beasts came from the south, from the depths of the Bora. Kor focused the defense on the southern sector. The palisade is strongest there. The moat is deepest. Tripwires in 3 rows. Stakes in the moat. Positions for archers on the wall. 4 points. 10 meters between them. Each archer covers his own sector. Garrick in the central position, the best archer in the center. Tobin on the right, 2 men on the flanks, Kor at the bottom. At the gate. With a spear he made from a pole and a knife tied on with a leather strap. Rough, but the blade holds and strikes. He ran drills. Once, in the evening, in the dark, because the beasts come at night. The archers took their positions. Kor walked the perimeter, checked, adjusted. Garrick stood on the wall and stared into the darkness. Calm. This guy won't run. Tobin was nervous, fidgeting. The arrows in the quiver clattered. Kor walked over to him. He whispered that when the time came, he needed to breathe. Inhale for a count of 4, exhale for 4, and aim for the torso, not the head. The torso is a bigger target. Tobin nodded, pale, but he nodded. The night passed without an attack. 2 more days until the full moon. It was a rehearsal. Kor dismissed the men. He told them to rest tomorrow, to gather their strength. The night after tomorrow would be the real one. He came home. Mara wasn't asleep. She was waiting. Ren was sleeping on the cot. A rag doll lay next to her. Mara had sewn it from scraps of leather and stuffed it with straw. Rough, crooked. Ren wouldn't let it out of her hands. Her first toy in a long time. Kor sat by the hearth. Mara sat down next to him, close, closer than usual. She asked if he would be on the wall the day after tomorrow. He said he would be at the gate. She was silent for a moment. Then she said that if anything happened to him, Ren would be left alone. Kor looked at her. She wasn't crying. Her eyes were dry. It wasn't fear, it was calculation. A woman who had lost 1 child to starvation weighs her options. Pragmatic, tough, strong. Kor said nothing would happen. She asked how he knew. He replied that he knew because he was prepared. Because he had a plan, and people, and a moat, and archers, and traps. And because he wasn't going to die until Ren grew up and learned to defend herself. Mara looked at him. For a long time. Then she leaned in and kissed him. The first time since he'd woken up. His lips were dry, chapped, warm. A brief kiss. She pulled away and walked over to the cot. She lay down next to Ren. Kor was sitting by the hearth, fingers to his lips. Dalton Reyes, 34 years old, 12 years of war, 4 continents. He died and was resurrected in a stranger's body. He kills boars and digs trenches and teaches boys to shoot with crooked bows. He has a wife who just kissed him and a daughter who sleeps hugging a rag doll. And the night after tomorrow, monsters will come to his house. He picked up his spear, checked the knife's attachment, twirled it in his hands. The balance is off, heavy at the tip, but it cuts. He sharpened the blade with a stone, rhythmically, monotonously, preparing for the operation. In 2 days, he would find out if everything he had built was worth anything at all. Kor spent the day before the full moon checking everything. He walked the entire perimeter, every meter of the moat, every tripwire, every stake, every section of the palisade. He adjusted them, tightened them, replaced any slackened rope. He added 2 rows of tripwires at the southeast corner where the approach from the forest was closest.
Then he walked around the firing positions. He laid out arrows at each one, 5 standard ones, 7 homemade ones, a reserve. Next to each position, I stuck a torch, unlit. I'll need the fire to see, and so they can see me. According to the stories, the creatures weren't afraid of fire, but light carries farther than an arrow in the dark. Evening. The sun had set. The sky was clear. The stars were bright. The moon was full and white. It hung over the forest, huge. Kor stood on the wall and looked at it. Beautiful. Deadly.
Somewhere in the forest, something is rising now and heading toward the village. Because the moon called. Or because something deep in the forest drove them here. He climbed down, walked past the fighters. Garrick is in position, bow in his hands. His face is calm, rock solid. This guy's got what it takes. Tobin was nearby, pale but in position. His hands weren't shaking. He's got what it takes. 2 men in the flanking positions, scared, but holding their ground. 4 torches burned on the wall. The light fell on the snow in front of the moat. Visibility 30 meters. Beyond that, darkness and the forest. Kor stood by the gate, spear in his hands. Nearby, an axe stuck in a log, a backup weapon. He waited. The village behind him was silent. 80 souls behind flimsy doors. Children, old people, women, Mara and Ren. He heard a child crying quietly somewhere. Another child, not Ren. Ren doesn't cry. An hour passed. 2. Silence. Cold. Kor stood motionless, controlling his breathing, listening. A wind from the south, carrying scents from the forest. Pine needles, snow, and something else. Musk. Acid. That very scent. They're coming. Kor whistled softly. The signal. The archers on the wall took their positions. Garrick drew his bowstring. Silence. And then the tripwire snapped. The crack of dry branches in the darkness. Stones clattered. South sector, 20 meters from the ditch. Kor didn't move. He waited. Another crack. To the left. A second tripwire. They were moving in 2 groups, circling around, looking for a way through. Then he saw them. Eyes. 2 yellow lights in the darkness beyond the reach of the torches. Low, at waist level. The creature was crouching as it moved. Then another pair of eyes nearby. And another. 4 pairs. 4 creatures. They stepped into the light. Kor saw. Heder hadn't exaggerated. The size of a large wolf, but was different. The hind legs were long and powerful. The front paws had claws like sickles. The muzzle was elongated. Too many teeth. The fur was dark, spotted. The eyes were yellow, and there was intelligence in them. Not animal instinct. Intelligence. They looked at the ditch and understood it was an obstacle. One creature walked along the ditch, looking for the edge, a way around. Smart. The other 3 stood and looked at the wall, at the people. "Kor!" Garrick shouted. One word. "Central!" Garrick fired. The arrow flew into the darkness. It hit. The creature screeched. A high-pitched, sharp sound. Not an animal howl, something else. The arrow entered its shoulder. The creature flinched, but didn't fall. It lunged forward, jumped over the ditch. A long leap. Powerful. The stakes at the bottom didn't catch. It cleared it. It slammed into the palisade. Its claws dug into the wood. It climbed up, quickly. Tobin fired from above. From 3 meters, the arrow entered its back. The creature screeched and fell down, into the moat, onto the stakes. One stake pierced its side. It thrashed. Kor approached the edge of the moat. He thrust his spear down from above, into the neck. The creature twitched and went still. 1. The second and third burst out simultaneously, from both sides, the right flank and the center. The man on the right flank fired, missed. His hands were shaking. He fired again, hit the paw. The creature didn't slow down. It leaped over the ditch, crashed into the palisade. The logs cracked. The section is new. It's holding. The creature tore at the wood with its claws. Splinters flew. Garrick shifted his aim, fired, hit the side. The creature snarled, bounced back. A third creature came in from the left flank. There's no ditch there. Kor hadn't managed to extend the ditch to the western side yet. It slammed into the old palisade. Rotten logs cracked. One fell out. A hole. The creature crawled inside. Kor ran. Along the wall. 20 meters. The creature had squeezed halfway through the gap. Its head and front paws were inside. The hind ones were outside. Kor struck with his spear. In the face. The tip pierced its eye. The creature roared. It jerked back. It slashed the shaft with a claw. The spear broke. Kor snatched the axe from his belt. The creature lunged forward. He struck. In the skull. The blade went deep. The creature collapsed into the gaps in the palisade. Stuck. Not moving. 2. He turned. The second creature by the central wall retreated. 3 arrows in its body. Garrick had shot accurately. It was backing toward the forest. It was limping. Kor shouted not to pursue it. A wounded creature in the dark is a trap. The 4th one. The one that had been circling the moat. Kor scanned the area with his eyes. He didn't see it. Silence. Then a scream. To the right. From the east side. A woman's scream from the house. The creature had circled the entire village. It had found a gap in the eastern palisade. Kor ran. Down the village street. In the darkness. An axe in his hand. A house on the eastern side. The door was torn off its hinges. A crash inside. A scream. Kor burst through the doorway. Darkness. The smell of blood and musk. The creature was inside. It darted into a corner. Yellow eyes. Glowing. Kor didn't think. His body acted on its own. He threw the axe. Not at the creature. At the wall nearby. A crash. The creature flinched at the sound. Instinct. Distracted for a split second. Kor leaped forward, grabbed a stool from the floor, slammed it into the creature's face. The wood splintered. The creature looked its head, stunned. Kor picked up the axe and struck, twice, the neck. The creature fell, twitched, went still. 3. A woman was sitting in the corner of the house. She was holding 2 children close to her, blood on her arm, a scratch, not deep. Kor told her not to move. He went outside. He circled the perimeter. The 4th creature was dead. The 2nd had fled into the woods, wounded. The 1st and 3rd were dead where they fell. 3 out of 4. The wounded one might return. Or it might not. Kor posted Garrick and Tobin on the wall until dawn, to take turns. The rest could rest. The wounded one didn't return. Dawn came gray and quiet. The snow in the field in front of the village was trampled. Claw marks. Blood. Dark. Almost black. 3 corpses of the creatures lay by the walls. The villagers came out of their houses. They watched, silently. For 7 years, every full moon, someone had died. That night, no one died. The scratch on the woman's arm didn't count. Kor stood by the creature's corpse in the ditch. He looked at it in the light of day. An ugly creature. Muscles beneath the skin like steel cables. Claws a finger's length long. Teeth in 3 rows. And the eyes. Even dead, they seemed intelligent. Garrick approached, stood nearby, said nothing. Then said it was his first fight. Kor said he'd shot well. Garrick nodded. His hands were shaking. Now, after the fight, not during it. Kor knew that feeling. The adrenaline had worn off. The body catches up. He told Garrick to go to sleep. The guy left. Tobin was sitting on the wall, staring at the forest, his eyes red from a sleepless night. Kor walked over. Tobin said that when the creature climbed the wall, he thought he was going to die. Kor replied that it was normal. Everyone thinks that the first time. The important thing was that he didn't run away or drop his bow. Tobin asked if it would get easier. Kor said no, but it would become more familiar. Tobin nodded and went to sleep. Kor remained alone on the wall. He looked at the forest. The dark forest stood like a wall, as always. But today, something had changed. Not the forest, the village. For the first time in 7 years, Ashmore had survived a full moon without losses. For the first time, they hadn't hidden, but had faced it. For the first time, they had fought. Kor turned and looked at the village. People stood by their houses and looked at the corpses of the creatures. There was something new in their eyes. Not joy, not relief. Surprise. They couldn't believe it was possible. That it was possible not to die every full moon. that it was possible to fight and win. Bram stood in the doorway of his house. He watched. His face was unreadable. Kor didn't approach him. The result spoke louder than words. He climbed down from the wall and went home. Mara was standing in the doorway. Ren was peeking out from behind her leg. Her eyes were huge. She had heard the creature's screams that night. Kor walked over. He crouched down in front of his daughter. He looked into her eyes. He told her it was all over, that she didn't have to be afraid. Ren reached out and touched his face, the creature's blood on his cheek, dark, dried. The girl didn't pull her hand away. She touched it and then withdrew it. Then she said she wanted something to eat. Kor picked her up in his arms. Light. Too light for a 6-year-old, but warm, alive. He carried her into the house. The morning after the full moon, Ashmore was met with silence. Not the dead silence that comes from fear, a different kind. The silence of relief. People walked through the village and looked at the creature's corpses by the walls. They touched the claws. They felt the carcasses. Carefully, as if the dead creature might come to life and bite. The children stood aside and stared. Kor didn't let the people linger. He gathered the men at the gate and said the work wasn't done. The trench needed to be dug further. The eastern side was open. The creature had passed right there. If there had been 8 instead of 4, the village not have held out. The people listened. Last night they'd seen Kor fight. How he killed the creatures everyone had considered invincible for 7 years. Now they listened differently. Not as a drunk hunter, as a commander. 6 men went out to dig the trench that very day. No arguments, no persuasion. Bram didn't go out, but he didn't get in the way either. He stood by his house and watched the men work. His face was heavy. He had lost his battle with reality and knew it. Kor set to work on the creature's carcasses. The meat was inedible. It reeked of musk and rot. But the hide was tough, thick. The claws were sharp, the teeth harder than steel. Kor skinned them, 3 of them. He laid them out to dry. He pulled out the claws and set them aside. The claws could be made into arrowheads, better than charred wood, better than the dull iron found in the village. The teeth came in handy too. A knife made from the creature's tooth would cut better than half of what's in Ashmore. Dalton had spent his whole life working with what he had. Trophied weapons are the best weapons because they're free. Garrick arrived around noon. He'd slept well. His eyes were clear. His hands weren't shaking anymore. Kor gave him a claw and told him to attach it to an arrow instead of the arrowhead. Garrick twirled the claw between his fingers. He whistled. Sharp as a razor. An hour later, they had an arrow with a claw tip. Kor tested it. The arrow sank 3 fingers deep into a log from the palisade. A regular one went in 1 finger deep. The difference between a scratch and a wound. Tobin brought news. 2 men who had previously refused to learn how to hunt came and asked when the next lesson was. Kor said, tomorrow at dawn. The village was changing. Slowly. But it was changing. Fear began to give way to something else. Not bravery, far from bravery, but readiness. Readiness to try not to die. For the next 2 weeks, Kor worked non-stop. The moat closed around the village on the 20th day. A full perimeter, 400 meters. Shallow, waist-deep at the deepest point. Around the rest. Stakes driven into the bottom every meter. Tripwires in 2 rows in front of the moat all the way around. The palisade patched up. Old sections replaced. The gate is new. The hinges are wooden, but sturdy. The bolt is a solid log. There are now 8 firing positions, 4 on the south wall, 2 each on the east and west. The north side is covered by a ravine, a natural barrier. Kor left a minimal presence there. There are now 12 hunters. The 6 new ones learned faster than Kor expected. Hunger and fear are excellent motivators. 2 of the new recruits turned out to be decent marksmen. Not Garrick, but passable. Kor divided the men into groups of 3 hunting parties. Each worked its own sector of the forest, checked the traps, set new ones, brought back the catch. The meat went into the communal pot. Kor insisted. No private stashes while the village was starving. Everything into the communal pot, divided equally. The men grumbled, but obeyed. Meat in the communal pot changed the village's politics faster than any words. People who eat from the same pot don't fight among themselves. They fight whoever threatens the pot. Mara took charge of the preparations. She organized the women. 4 of them helped her smoke and dry the meat. They tanned the hides together. They boiled the bones for glue and broth. They rendered the fat for candles and grease. Nothing went to waste. Kor showed Mara how to make pemmican. She mastered it in a day and taught the rest. By the end of the second week, Kor's pantry was hung with bundles of smoked meat, strips of dried meat, pots of rendered fat, a stockpile, a real stockpile. Mara entered the pantry in the evening. Kor heard her stop. She stood there for a long time. Then she whispered that they had food, and that right now they had food for the winter. Kor followed her in. She was sitting on the floor, back against the wall, hands on her knees, crying. Not the way she'd cried on the first day, quietly turning away from her daughter. Different. Openly, loudly, to everyone. A year ago she lost her son, her youngest. Hunger took him. The memory came to Kor suddenly. A boy, 2 years old. His name was Fen. He died in the winter. He just stopped eating one morning. Mara fed him whatever she could, but there was nothing to feed him. For 3 days he lay there staring at the ceiling. On the 4th, he closed his eyes. Kor didn't know that. Dalton didn't know. Her body's memory brought up an image. A small body wrapped in rags. Mara on her knees by the threshold. Kor standing nearby with a bottle. Drunk. Useless. Dalton stood in the pantry and watched the woman crying on the floor because she was seeing food for the first time in a year. The operator was used to loss, to other people's pain, to blood and corpses. He'd seen things that drive people mad and kept going because the mission wouldn't wait. But there was no mission here. There was a woman who'd lost a child and was now crying because another child wouldn't die, and Kor didn't know what to do. He sat down next to her, on the cold floor. He put his hand on her shoulder, silently. She cried for a long time. He sat next to her and held her shoulder. Then she quieted down, wiped her face, looked at him, said that Fen had died because Kor couldn't bring food. She wasn't blaming him. She stated it as a fact. Then she said that Ren would live because now he could, and she asked what had happened to him, what had changed. Kor answered the only thing he could. He said that he had died back then while hunting, died and came back, and what had come back decided that no more children in this house would die of hunger. Mara looked at him. She didn't understand, or perhaps she understood it in her own way. She nodded. She stood up. She wiped her hands on her skirt and went to feed Ren his dinner. Kor stayed in the pantry. He sat on the floor. He looked at the bundles of meat hanging above his head. Fen. A boy he had never seen, whose father drank and couldn't provide food, whose mother boiled leather straps. In his past life, Dalton Reyes had fought for people he didn't know, killed on orders he didn't understand, died for a group that might not even remember his name. And here, a boy had died because his father didn't have the strength to bring home meat. Kor stood up. He left the pantry. He left the house. He walked over to Heder. The old man was sitting by the house, whittling a stick. Kor asked where Fen's grave was. Heder pointed. Beyond the village. The northern slope beyond the ravine. A small mound. A stone on top. No inscription. Kor stood by the grave of another man's son and said nothing. Snow fell on the stone. Fine, prickly. He didn't know what to say to the dead boy. He wasn't his father. He had taken his father's place. He fed his mother and sister the meat that the real Kor couldn't provide. He stood there for a long time. Then he said one sentence aloud. He said he would work it off. He turned and walked back to the village. By the end of the first month, Ashmore looked different. The moat and palisade gave the impression of a border. Not just a fence, but a line of defense. Tripwires covered the approaches on all sides. Hunting parties went out every day and returned with meat. Not always a lot, but every day. The cauldron in the center of the village was constantly boiling. The children began to run. Not fast, but to run. Before, they sat by the walls and conserved their strength. Now they ate twice a day, and their bodies began to remember what childhood was like. Ren changed the most. She followed Kor like a shadow. In the morning, she saw him off to the gate. In the evening, she met him. She no longer covered her bowl with her hand. She began to talk. Not much, but words appeared. She asked about the forest, about traps, about animals.
Kor answered, briefly, simply. She listened intently, as if she were memorizing every word. One morning she went out into the yard with a rope in her hands and tried to tie a noose. Her hands were small, her fingers were weak. The knot didn't work. She tried again, and again.
Kor stood in the doorway and watched. He didn't help. He waited. On the fourth try, she tied something vaguely a slipknot. She lifted her head and looked at her father. She didn't smile, but there was something new in her eyes. Pride. Small, fragile, the first in a long time. Kor nodded at her, seriously, as an equal. She nodded back and went to try again. The second month began with rumors. Kor heard about them from Hedhar. The old man came in the morning and said that a merchant passing along the road 20 kilometers to the east had seen smoke rising from Ashmore. There had been no smoke before. The village had been dying quietly, and smoke would have meant they were burning the last houses. But now the smoke was coming from the smokehouses. 10 smokehouses were operating every day. Plumes of smoke rose above the village and were visible from afar. The merchant told the inn that the abandoned village was alive. Rumors spread quickly. Hedhar said that this might attract attention. Kor knew. A well-fed village in the Black Zone is an anomaly. Anomalies attract two types of people: those who want to know how, and those who want to take what. The first might be useful. The second are dangerous. He doubled the patrols. Garrick and Tobin took turns on watch at the southern wall at night. During the day, 2 new hunters stood at the gate, not for the beasts, for people. A week later, the first guests arrived, 3 men on skinny horses. Their clothes were worn but sturdy. They were armed, short swords, knives. One had a crossbow on his back. Kor watched them from the wall. His trained eye took it all in seconds. Not soldiers, not merchants. Scouts. They rode slowly, looking around, counting. Houses, people, smoke, walls, the moat. One of them noticed the moat and said something to the others. They stopped 100 meters from the gate. One dismounted and walked toward the village, hands in plain sight, showing he was unarmed weapons. Kor climbed down and went out through the gate, alone. No visible weapons, a knife behind his back under his jacket. The man approached, young, about 25, shifty eyes, smiling, a fake smile. Kor had seen types like him, a low-level scumbag on a recon mission. The man said they were travelers looking for a place to stay. Kor replied that there was no lodging. The man looked at the smoke from the smokehouses and said it smelled good, and maybe they'd buy some meat. Kor replied that the meat wasn't for sale. The man stopped smiling. He looked at the moat, the stockade, and the wall. He asked how long the moat had been there. Kor didn't answer. The man stood there for another minute, then turned and walked back to his people. The 3 rode off to the east. Kor returned and told Garrick to get the men ready. In 3 days, maybe 5, maybe a week, they'll be back. And not just the 3 of them. Garrick asked how he knew. Kor said that scouts always return with the main group, if they return with good news. And a rich village without defenses is good news for bandits. Garrick objected that the village had defenses. Kor shook his head. A moat and a rotten palisade are defenses against beasts. People are smarter than beasts. People see a moat and go around it. People see archers and hide. People come at night and set fires. You need a different tactic against people. Kor began to prepare. He reorganized the defenses. A wall and a moat work against beasts. An ambush works against people. He chose 3 spots outside the village. The first on the trail from the east, a fallen tree by the roadside. 2 men with bows could hide behind it. The second on the northern approach, bushes by the ravine, an ideal position for a flanking attack. The third at the edge of the forest, the farthest one, for observation and early warning. He positioned his men, Garrick and Tobin at the first point, 2 new hunters at the second. At the third, he placed a 14-year-old boy. Not a fighter, a runner. The boy is fast. He'll spot strangers and run to the village. The signal. Time to prepare. During the day, Kor taught the men something new. Not hunting, combat. The difference is simple. When hunting, you strike a beast that doesn't know you're there. In combat, you strike a man who knows and strikes back. He demonstrated the basics: how to hold a knife, how to strike, where to strike. The throat, armpit, groin, soft spots. Against a man in leather armor, a stabbing blow to the torso is useless. You need the soft spots. The men listened, turning pale. They were used to axes and pitchforks, not to knives in the throat. Kor didn't push it. He laid the groundwork. The rest would come when the time came. Or it wouldn't. He hoped that an ambush would settle the matter before it came to hand-to-hand combat. On the 5th day after the scouts, a young runner burst into the village at sunset, out of breath. Strangers on the eastern trail, many of them. Kor went out onto the wall. He looked east. You can't see anything in the twilight, but 10 minutes later they appeared. Torches. Kor counted. 1, 2, 5, 8, 11, 14 torches. 14 people. Maybe more. Those without torches are invisible. Kor climbed down, quickly, quietly gave orders. Garrick and Tobin to the position by the fallen tree, 2 to the flank toward the ravine, the rest to the wall. Women and children to the central house, the sturdiest one, stone walls. Mara gathered the children. Ren walked in silence. She didn't cry. She didn't ask questions. She just followed wherever her mother led. Kor watched them go. Then he turned toward the forest. No, toward the east. The enemy was coming from there. The torches were getting closer. They were coming down the path. They weren't hiding. 14 men against a village they considered defenseless. Why hide? They came within 100 meters, stopped. One stepped forward, large, broad, a red beard, loud voice. He shouted that the village must open the gates and that Captain Voss wanted to talk. Kor stood on the wall, silent. The man shouted again, said that if they didn't open the gates, they would open them themselves, and then the conversation would be different. Kor replied, quietly, calmly, said that the gates were closed and that there would be no conversation, and that if they didn't leave before dark, the conversation would indeed be a different one. The man laughed. He turned to his men. He said something. Laughter. 14 armed men were laughing at a peasant on a rotten wall. Kor waited. It was getting dark. He was waiting for darkness. In the dark, the advantage belongs to whoever knows the terrain. They don't know it. He knows it. Garrick knows it. Tobin knows it. Darkness fell half an hour later. The torches burned brightly. The bandits stood in a cluster, lit up, visible, stupid. Military mistake number 1. Gathering in a cluster with torches at night means telling the enemy, "Here we're here, shoot here." Kor whistled. 2 short blasts. Garrick's signal. Arrows flew from the darkness to the right of the trail. 2. Claw-tipped. The first hit the man at the edge of the group, in the thigh. He screamed and fell. The second one flew past. The bandits flinched. They screamed. They waved their torches. They couldn't see where the shots were coming from. Darkness all around. The torchlight blinded them. 2 more arrows. One hit the second man in the shoulder. He dropped his torch. A scream. The bandits rushed forward, toward the village, toward the gates, away from the invisible enemy in the darkness. Kor had been waiting for this. They ran toward the village and fell into the moat. The first one sank in up to his waist. Stakes pierced his leg. A howl. The second stumbled over the first. The third stopped. The ditch. They didn't know about the ditch. The tripwires snapped. A crack. A crash. Panic. 2 from the flank ambush by the ravine struck from the left. Arrows from the darkness. 1 hit. A scream. The bandits darted between the ditch and the invisible archers. Torches fell into the snow and went out. The darkness swallowed the light. Kor stood on the wall and gave orders. His voice was steady, as in training. Left flank, fire. Right flank, reload. Wall, fire ready. Archers on the wall shot down. Close. 20 paces. Hard to miss. 2 more bandits fell. A voice from the darkness. Loud, angry, commanding. Voss. He was yelling at his men to retreat. Back, toward the trail. The bandits ran, those who could. 3 remained in the ditch, 1 with a stake in his leg, 2 with arrows. The rest were leaving, quickly. They tossed aside their torches. The darkness swallowed them up. Kor didn't order a pursuit. A nighttime chase after armed men in unfamiliar terrain is suicide. He let them go. Garrick and Tobin returned to the village half an hour later, both unharmed. Garrick was carrying a captured crossbow. He'd taken it from the wounded man who dropped it while fleeing. Tobin carried 2 swords. Kor examined the spoils. The crossbow was good, well maintained. The mechanism worked, 10 bolts in the quiver. That threw off the balance. The crossbow has a range of 100 meters, more accurate than a bow, more powerful. With a clawed tip, it would pierce leather armor. The swords were short, army issue, stolen or taken from corpses, but the steel was good. Kor distributed the weapons, the crossbow to Garrick. The guy would get the hang of it. The swords to the 2 best of the new hunters. The 3 wounded bandits in the ditch were pulled out this morning. 1 died during the night from blood loss. A stake pierced an artery. 2 are alive, arrows lodged in their flesh. Not fatal. Kor interrogated them, calmly, without threats, just asked who they were, where they were from, and how many of them there were. They started talking quickly. Wounded and frightened people talk easily. The Voss gang, 40 men, base at an old mill 30 kilometers to the southeast. Voss is a former sergeant in the Royal Guard. He deserted 5 years ago. He gathered a gang of the same sort. They control the area. 3 villages pay tribute. Whoever doesn't pay gets burned. They found Ashmore by the smoke and rumors. Thought it would be easy pickings. They were wrong. Kor asked if Voss would return. The bandit looked at him and said that Voss doesn't forgive. He'll be back, with a bigger group, and he won't talk. Kor nodded. He released the prisoners, gave them food for the road. He bandaged their wounds. The men on the wall watched in confusion. Why let them go? Kor explained simply. 2 wounded men who will return to camp and tell them the village is putting up a fight is better than 2 dead men. The dead are silent. The living tell stories. And what they tell will make Voss think. A thinking enemy makes mistakes. A hasty enemy does too, but different ones. Kor preferred an enemy who thinks. A thinking enemy can be predicted. After the prisoners left, Kor sat down with Garrick and Heder, the trio, commander, fighter, advisor. Kor laid out the situation. Voss will return, in a week, maybe 2, with at least 20 men, maybe 30. They have swords, crossbows, and experience in raiding. The village has a moat, a wall, and 12 hunters with bows and knives. The math is bad. We can't hold out in a head-on battle. So there won't be a head-on battle. It'll be a special operation. Kor started planning, not a defense, an attack. Strike first, on his turf, by his rules. Heder said it was madness. To march on the mill with 12 men against 40 bandits? Kor said he wouldn't march on the mill. He'd go to the trail where Voss would lead his men to the village, and meet him there. An ambush. At night. On the rolls. When the column is stretched out and not expecting an attack. Garrick listened in silence. Then he nodded. A single gesture. No words. The guy trusted him, completely. Tobin said he was afraid. Kor replied that was right. It's normal to be afraid. The main thing is to do what needs to be done, despite the fear. The preparations took 4 days. Kor chose the spot. A section of the trail 5 kilometers to the southeast. Narrow, between 2 hills, forest on both sides. A natural funnel. The column on the march would pass through here in a line. It would stretch out. It would lose formation. The perfect spot for an ambush. He positioned his men. 6 with bows on the left hill, behind the trees, invisible. 4 with knives and spears down below on the right, for the finishing blow. Garrick with a crossbow at the top of the left hill. The best position, the best marksman. Kor himself lay down on the trail behind a fallen tree, the front line, alone, with a knife. His task was to provoke them, to make them stop, then to leave, to lure them into the trap. They waited for 3 days. Kor rotated the men in their positions every 8 hours. He himself remained. He slept for 2 hours at a time, ate pemmican, drank melted snow. On the 4th night, footsteps were heard. Many, heavy. The clang of metal, voices, torches between the trees. Kor lay behind a log and counted. 22 lights. 22 at least. The column was moving along the trail, stretched out 50 meters. 2 sentries in front, Voss in the center. Kor recognized him by his voice. Loud, commanding. The man was used to giving orders and wasn't afraid of the forest. He shouldn't have been. The scouts passed the log. They didn't notice Kor. He lay motionless, snow on his back, dark clothing, invisible. The scouts passed. The main group entered the hollow. Kor stood up, quietly. He stepped onto the trail behind the last of them. He whistled, loudly. One long whistle, a signal. Arrows struck from the hill on the left, 6 at once. The darkness erupted with screams. Torches flashed, people fell. A crossbow bolt with a claw tip struck the center of the column. Someone collapsed. Garrick reloaded and fired again. 4 seconds between shots. Good. Kor ran back along the path, toward the village, past the crater. To the left, the archers continued to fire. The bandits rushed to the right, into the forest, away from the arrows. 4 men with spears were waiting for them there. A short, brutal fight in the darkness. Screams, crunching, moans. Kor didn't see it. He heard it. He took up a position behind the second log and waited. Voss was shouting orders, regrouping, experienced. He quickly realized it was an ambush and gave the order to retreat. The bandits began to retreat along the trail, back, away from the crater. Kor didn't pursue. He let them go. He didn't want a massacre. He wanted results. He got results. In the morning, 6 bodies lay on the trail. 14 had left. Some were wounded. 6 out of 22. Losses any bandit would feel. The villagers lost 1. A man with a spear had been struck in the arm by a sword, a deep cut. Kor stitched up the wound. Field medicine, a bone needle, a sinew thread. Painful, but the man would live and keep his arm. Kor gathered the spoils: 4 swords, crossbow, leather breastplates, knives, ropes, flasks, silver coins in pouches. Not many, but for a village that hadn't seen money in 7 years, it was a fortune. He distributed the weapons. Now Ashmore had 3 crossbows and 6 swords. 12 hunters were better armed than half the village militias in the kingdom. Kor returned to the village a victor. He didn't feel like a victor. 6 corpses on the trail. People, not beasts. Bandits, but people. Dalton had been killing people for 12 years. Every time it was part of the job. Here, too. But here he killed to protect Ren and Mara and the 80 souls behind the stockade. A difference. A big one. After the rout on the trail, Voss didn't return. Not in a week, not in 2. Kor didn't let his guard down. He knew how people like Voss operated. A sergeant who deserted and assembled a gang is a man of pride and patience. He licks his wounds, gathers strength, seeks allies, and strikes when the enemy lets its guard down. Kor won't let his guard down, but he had time, and he used it. The 3rd month. Winter was in full force. Snow up to the knees, a bitter frost. The river had frozen over. The forest had fallen silent. No creatures in sight. 6 weeks have passed since the full moon. The next one is in 2 weeks. Kor was preparing for both fronts, against the beasts and against the people, simultaneously. Hunting parties worked every day. 3 groups of 3, each in its own sector. Traps were set throughout the southern and eastern forest, a net of 40 loops. The catch was steady. 2 or 3 boars a week, hares, sometimes a deer. They smoked, dried, and salted the meat. Heder found the salt. He led Kor to an outcrop of rock on the western edge of the forest. White crystals on the stones. Not pure salt, with impurities, but it's good enough for salting. Kor broke off as much as he could carry and sent Garrick and Tobin back for the rest. Salt changed everything. With salt, meat keeps for months. With salt, you can build real stockpiles. With salt, you can trade. Kor thought about trading. Not now. In the spring, when the roads open. Hides, smoked meat, salt. Ashmore has things to offer, and things to buy. Iron, tools, cloth, seeds, grain. Everything that had been missing for 7 years. But that's spring. Now is winter. Now is survival. Kor had reorganized village life. Not alone, with Mara. She turned out to be a born organizer. When Kor gave her resources, she turned a bunch of hungry women into a working collective. Meat was processed at the central site. Hides were tanned in a separate shed. Bones were boiled for glue. The tendons were dried for thread and bowstrings. Mara and 3 women sewed winter clothes from boar hides, rough but warm. Every child in the village received a fur coat. Small, smelly, but warm. The children stopped freezing. Kor looked at Mara and saw someone he hadn't noticed before. Not an emaciated woman with lifeless eyes. A rear area commander.
A woman who knew how to distribute every piece of meat and every scrap of leather so there would be enough for everyone. She did it quietly, without shouting, without arguments. The women obeyed her because she worked harder than anyone else. She was the first to start, the last to finish. Her hands were calloused, her back wouldn't straighten by evening, but her eyes burned. For the first time in years, she had something to work with, and she worked. Kor caught himself staring at her, not as an operator on a protection assignment, differently, as a man looking at a woman. In 12 years of war, Dalton Reyes hadn't had time to start a family. There had been women, brief encounters between operations, no one steady, no time, no point. An operator lives from mission to mission, and then dies. Now he has a wife, a real one, not his, someone else's man. A man who drank and couldn't provide for his family. A man she had stopped loving long before the fever. Kor took his place, took it and began doing what the other man couldn't. And Mara looked at him the way she had never looked at her husband. One evening, she sat by the hearth mending his jacket, silently, intently. Ren was asleep, quietly. Kor came in from the cold, sat down beside her. She shifted closer, shoulder to shoulder. Kor froze. Dalton froze inside. A simple touch, shoulder to shoulder, and something stirred inside him. Something the operator didn't know, or had forgotten, or had never had. Warmth. Not from the fire, from the person next to him. Mara kept sewing. She didn't move her shoulder. Kor didn't move his. They sat like that until the fire burned out. Then they lay down, next to each other, closer than before. She rested her head on his shoulder, for the first time. Kor lay in the darkness and listened to her breathing, steady, calm. She had fallen asleep. She trusted him enough to fall asleep next to him. For a woman who had lived next to a drunkard for a year, this was more than a kiss. Kor didn't sleep. He thought. About how he was a stranger in this body. About the fact that Mara doesn't know who he is. About the fact that if she finds out, she'll break. Or maybe she won't. He didn't know. He decided he wouldn't tell her. Not because he's afraid. Because it won't change anything. Dalton is dead. Kor is alive. Mara loves Kor. The new Kor who emerged from the fever. And this Kor will be the one she loves. He'll earn his place, every day, every piece of meat, every monster slain, every morning when Ren wakes up full and warm. He'll earn it. The second full moon came in 2 weeks. Kor was ready. The moat was reinforced. The stakes had been replaced with fresh ones. The tripwires were renewed. There were now 8 archers, 3 crossbowmen, 5 bows, claw tips on every arrow. Kor stood on the wall. Next to him, Garrick with a crossbow, Tobin with a bow. 6 men in position. Night. Moon. Silence. Then the signal tripwires. A crack. Kor timed it, faster than last time. The creatures are learning. They remembered where the tripwires were. They bypassed the first row, hit the second, but bypassed the first. Smart. He saw the eyes. Yellow. 6 pairs. 6 creatures. More than last time. They stood at the edge of the light from the torches. They watched. Didn't rush in right away. Studying. One went along the ditch. Another in the other direction. A flanking move. 2 remained in the center. A diversion. 2 disappeared into the darkness. No one knows where. Tactics. Pack tactics. Kor assessed. These creatures aren't just smart. They're trainable. They've memorized the moat and the traps. They've adapted. He gave the orders. Garrick, center. Tobin, right flank. 2 on the left. 2 in reserve down by the gate. The crossbow struck first. Garrick fired at the creature in the center. The bolt with the clawed tip pierced its chest. The creature screeched and collapsed. 1 down. The second one in the center lunged forward, leaped over the moat. A long jump. Powerful. Cleared it. Slammed into the wall. Scaled it.
quickly. 3 arrows struck her from above, one in the neck. She slipped, fell into the moat onto the stakes, thrashed, fell silent. 2. The right flanker reached the eastern wall. The moat was shallower there. She made her way across. Her claws dug into the palisade. New logs, sturdy, but her claws were long. They tore at the wood. Tobin fired from above, hit her in the back. The creature didn't stop. Stubborn. It kept climbing. Tobin fired again. Shoulder. The creature slowed down. Kor ran up to the wall. A new spear. Sturdy. The shaft made of young ash. The tip made from the creature's tooth, bound with sinew. He struck from top to bottom, into the skull. The tip went in. The creature went limp, collapsed. 3. The one on the left, circling around, fell into the trap. A noose on the path along the ditch. Kor had set them there on purpose. Not for animals, for the creatures that circle around. The noose caught its hind leg. The creature jerked. It struggled. A rope made of boar sinew. Strong. It held. The creature thrashed. 2 archers from the flank shot it with 4 arrows. It fell silent. 4. 2 remaining. The ones that fled into the darkness. Kor waited. A minute. 2. Silence. Then a crash. From the north. The ravine. They circled the entire village. Crossed the ravine. Struck from the north. Minimal defenses there. 1 tripwire. 1 shooter. Kor ran. Across the whole village. The northern wall. The shooter at his post. A young man, shaking. 2 beasts 10 meters away. They're walking, not running. Walking. Slowly. Confidently. As if they know this is a weak spot. Kor stood on the wall next to the shooter. Told him to shoot. The guy fired. Missed. His hands were shaking. Kor took the bow from him. Drawn it back. Fired. Hit. In the front paw. The creature flinched but didn't stop. A second creature lunged. Quickly. A leap over the moat. It's shallow here. Knee-deep. It cleared it. Slammed into the wall. The logs cracked. Kor grabbed a spear. Struck down from above. The creature dodged. Fast. It slashed the shaft with its claws. Kor pulled back. The creature leaped again. Higher. Its claws dug into the edge of the wall. Its snout at his feet. 3 rows of teeth. The smell of musk and blood. Kor thrust the spear downward, into its open mouth. The tip of the spear penetrated its palate and beyond. The creature wheezed. Its claws loosened. It fell. 5. The last one. Wounded in the paw. It stood by the ditch. It watched. Yellow eyes. Intelligent. She had seen the 6th one die. She looked at Kor on the wall. At the spear in his hands. At the dead creature below. Then she turned and walked away. Slowly. She didn't run. She walked away. As if memorizing it. Kor watched her go. 6 creatures. 5 dead. 1 gone. The village is safe. Not a single casualty. For the 2nd time in a row. In the morning, Bram came to Kor. Silently. He stood next to the ditch where they'd pulled the creatures' bodies out. He stood there for a long time. Then he said he'd been wrong. Kor looked at him. Bram said that for 7 years he had told people they needed to be patient and pray, and that the forest must not be angered. And Kor had done in 2 months what prayers hadn't been able to do in 7. Bram said that if Kor needed help running the village, he was ready. Kor nodded. He accepted. Without fanfare, without conditions. Bram knew the village. He knew the people. He knew who was capable of what. He knew the supplies. He knew the problems. A good manager. A poor commander, but a good manager. Kor entrusted him with food distribution, stock accounting, organizing household chores, repairing roofs, gathering firewood, insulating houses, everything that wasn't war or hunting. Bram took it on, silently, diligently. The blacksmith's hands worked from dawn till dusk. A week later, roofs were being repaired. The houses were insulated with clay and moss. Firewood lay in stacks against every wall. Order. Military order. Kor at the front, Bram in the rear, Mara between them. The link. The village began to function as a single organism. By the end of the 3rd month, Ashmore was unrecognizable. A full-height moat ran along the entire perimeter. The stakes at the bottom were replaced with sharpened stakes made of hardwood, charred over a fire. The palisade was completely renewed, not a single rotten log. The gate hung on iron hinges. They found the iron in Bram's old smithy. The village elder dug up the tools he had been hiding for 7 years. A horn, an anvil, a hammer, a supply of coal. Kor asked why he had hidden them. Bram replied that he didn't believe anyone would be able to use them. Now he believed. Kor didn't know how to forge. Bram did. A blacksmith by the grace of God. His hands remembered the craft despite the years of inactivity. He lit the forge for the first time in 5 years. The smell of coal and hot metal wafted over the village. People stopped and watched. The clang of the hammer on the anvil was the sound of life, a sound Ashmore hadn't heard in a long time. Bram was forging. Arrowheads. Simple. Rough. But made of iron. Better than charred wood. Better than the claws of beasts for mass production. Kor saved the claw arrowheads for elite arrows, for Garrick, for crossbow bolts. Iron ones for everyone else. In 2 weeks, Bram forged 60 arrowheads. Kor fitted them to all the arrows. Then Bram turned to knives. Hunting knives. Short ones, with wooden handles. 12 of them. 1 for every hunter. Then axes. 4 new ones. Properly balanced. Kor checked. Good work. The axe flew straight. Cut deep. The village's arsenal grew with each passing day. 3 crossbows. 8 bows. 6 captured swords. 12 knives. 4 axes. 60 iron-tipped arrows. 20 bolts. For a village of 80 souls, this is an arsenal. Not an army, but an arsenal. Kor assigned roles to the men. The 12 hunters form the core of the fighting force. 6 of them are archers. 3 are crossbowmen. 3 are infantry with swords and spears. Garrick is the commander of the archery group. Tobin is the commander of the infantry. The rest of the village men are the militia. Axes and pitchforks, the last line of defense. Women and children are to be evacuated. Kor mapped out the evacuation route through the northern ravine, a path through the forest to a rocky shelter 3 kilometers away. Mara knew the route. Kor had taken her there twice. She remembered it. If the village falls, the women and children leave.
Mara leads. Rin stays by her side. Always. That is the order. Kor conveyed it to Mara without explanation. She understood. She didn't argue. The 4th month, midwinter. The frosts were growing stronger. The snow was deep. The forest stood white and silent. The traps were less effective. The animals had gone into hiding. Boars were less likely to venture onto the trails. Hares had retreated deeper into the woods. The catch had dropped. But their supplies held out. The smokehouses were full. Salted meat in barrels, pemmican in sacks. For the first time in 7 years, Ashmore wasn't starving in the winter. The children were gaining weight, slowly, but they were gaining it. Their cheeks were rounding out, their eyes were coming alive. Kor saw the orphan boys playing in the snow, running, pushing each other, laughing. A month ago, they had been sitting against the wall, waiting to die. Now they were playing. Rin played with them, not often. She was quieter than the others. But she played. Once, Kor saw her showing the youngest orphan how to tie a knot. Serious, focused, a 6-year-old teacher. He stood by the house and watched. Something tightened in his chest. Not pain, not fear. Something else. Dalton Reyes had not known this feeling. An operator has no right to such things. It gets in the way of work, distracts, makes you vulnerable. But Dalton is dead. And Kor stands by the house and watches his daughter teaching an orphan to tie knots. And this feeling doesn't get in the way. It gives him strength. Heder came in the evening. His face was serious. He said they needed to talk about the forest. Kor sat down with him by the hearth. Heder told him. He had gone to the western oak. He was gathering bark. And he noticed tracks. Not from animals. Different ones. Big ones. Deep. Solitary. 2-meter strides. Claws unlike those of the night prowlers. Longer. Thinner. Like needles. And the smell. Not musk. Something else. Sweet and rotten. A scent that makes the forest fall silent. Kor asked where exactly. Heder described the spot. The western edge of the forest, 2 kilometers from the village. The tracks went from south to west, bypassing. Past the village, not toward the village. Past. Kor thought. that something big had passed 2 kilometers from Ashmore and hadn't attacked. Not a night prowler. Something else. Something from the depths of the Bora. He asked Heder directly, the skinny one. Heder fell silent. Then he nodded. He thinks so. The tracks match. The size, the scent, the behavior. The skinny one doesn't hunt people directly. He passes by, and the forest behind him goes mad. The animals become more aggressive, smarter, more vicious. The night wanderers aren't a separate species. They're ordinary forest predators altered by his presence. The skinny one is like radiation. Doesn't kill instantly. Poisons gradually. Kor took in the information. The skinny one had passed by. Close. Closer than before. 2 kilometers. Heder said that before, its tracks had been found 10 kilometers from the village. It's getting closer. Kor asked why. Heder looked at him and said, maybe because someone is killing its creatures. The skinny one senses it. Its hunting grounds have been disturbed. The prey that was supposed to feed its minions is dying in traps. The village that was supposed to die and become carrion for the forest is suddenly surviving and fighting back. The skinny one has come to look at the anomaly. Kor sat by the hearth and thought. An anomaly. He is the anomaly. A special forces operator in the body of a medieval hunter. A man who kills beasts with traps and tactics in a world where everyone wages war with brute force. Of course Skinny noticed. He's smart. Heder said that Skinny is smarter than any beast. Kor replied that this is good. Heder didn't understand. Kor explained. A stupid enemy is unpredictable. A smart enemy is logical. A logical one can be outwitted. One who's outwitted can be outmaneuvered. For 12 years, Dalton hunted the smartest game on the planet. People. Field commanders, terrorists, scouts, people who hid and killed and thought they wouldn't be found. He found them all. Skinny is smarter than a beast, but he isn't smarter than a man who has spent his whole life hunting people. Kor began to plan. Not an attack, reconnaissance. The first stage of any operation against a smart enemy is data collection. Where he lives, how he moves, what he eats, when active, weaknesses, habits, routes. Kor began going into the forest alone. Early, before dawn. Not to hunt, to scout. He was looking for Skinny's tracks. He found 3 routes, all on the western and southwestern sides. All led to one place, deeper into the forest, to the south, to where, according to Heder, is the dead zone. Kor didn't go there, not yet. He marked the directions, calculated the distance by the tracks, measured the depth of the prints, estimated the weight. Heavy, very heavy. 300 kilograms minimum, maybe more. A 2-meter stride. That means long legs, a large body, claws like needles, so not for fighting, for something else, for climbing, or for burrowing into its prey. A parasite. A predatory parasite. Doesn't kill its prey, transforms it, makes it its own. Kor gathered data like a dossier on a target. Every trip into the forest added a line. After 2 weeks, he had a map of Skinny's routes. 3 paths, all converging at a single point, 7 kilometers southwest of the village. A dead zone. A lair. Kor wasn't in a hurry. Winter was still ahead. Skinny could wait. Spring first. Trade first. First, weapons and supplies. Then, the hunt for the main target. The 5th full moon was tougher. 8 beasts. 2 of them larger than usual. Heavier. Slower, but tougher. The arrows went in but didn't kill. It took 3 or 4 hits to take one down. A crossbow bolt with a claw tipped it down with a single shot. Garrick killed 3. One after another. Cold-blooded. Reload. Aim. Fire. Machine. Kor was proud of him. He didn't say it out loud. He nodded. Garrick understood. Tobin led the infantry. 3 men with swords and spears at the eastern breach. The creature had broken through the wall. A new section, but the creature was large and heavy. It struck with all its weight. The logs split apart. Tobin met it at the breach, spear forward. The creature rammed into him, deep, but it didn't die. It lunged. It clawed at Tobin's shoulder,
sliced through skin and muscle. Blood gushed out. Tobin didn't back down. He screamed and struck with his sword, in the neck. The creature collapsed. Tobin fell beside it. Kor was there a minute later. Field medicine. Apply pressure to the wound. Rinse, stitch. The tendons are intact. The bone isn't touched. The muscle is cut, but not all the way through. He'll live. He'll keep his arm. In a month, he'll be able to hold a weapon. Tobin lay there and stared at the sky.
His teeth were clenched, eyes wet, not from pain, from not backing down. Kor stitched the wound and silently thought that Tobin had crossed the line, that line beyond which a boy becomes a fighter. 8 creatures, all dead. Village casualties, 1 wounded. Acceptable. But Kor saw a trend. 4, 6, 8. With every full moon, more and bigger. The skinny one is turning up the heat, testing, looking for the limit, how much the village can take. 10, 12, 20? There's a number beyond which the moat and the arrows won't hold. Kor has to get to the source before that number is reached. Heder confirmed his thoughts, said that Skinny hadn't driven so many beasts at once before. The forest is reacting to the threat. The village has become a splinter. Skinny is trying to pull it out. Kor replied that the splinter will soon become a knife. Heder looked at him and smiled for the first time. He said there is an old legend that once a generation the forest calls for a defender into the body of one dying at the edge when the village faces its end. Kor didn't answer. Heder said that Boar is not cursed. Boar is dying. The skinny one is killing him from within, and the forest has called upon the one who knows how to kill monsters. Kor asked, why him? Heder replied that Kor had died protecting his own. That was why. The forest had chosen the one who gave his life for strangers, and gave him his own, so he would have something truly worth fighting for. Kor sat by the hearth. Ren slept nearby, snuggled up to Mara. A tiny hand clutched a rag doll. Mara breathed evenly. 2 lives. His whole war. His whole purpose. Heder had left. Kor sat and watched the fire. The forest had called him. The forest had given him a family. Now the forest was waiting for him to do what he had been called to do. Kill the skinny one. Bring back Boar. Save the village forever. Kor lay down next to Mara and Ren. He closed his eyes. In the spring. Spring arrived like an order to advance. The snow melted in 2 weeks. Mud, streams, the smell of wet earth. The forest rustled. The birds returned. Kor stood on the wall and listened. A different sound. Not the dead silence of winter. Life. The forest was waking up, and with it, everything that lived within it, both good and bad. Ashmore had survived the winter. All 80 souls. Not a single death. For the first time in 7 years. Not from hunger, not from the cold, not from beasts. People stood on the wet ground and couldn't believe it. Old woman Nella, who looked after the orphans, was crying by the communal cauldron. She said she didn't think she'd live to see spring. She did. And the 4 orphans did too. And everyone else. Kor wasn't celebrating. He was preparing. Spring means roads. Roads meant trade. Trade meant resources. But roads also meant something else. Voss. He hadn't come all winter. He'd been frozen in his mill, treating the wounded, counting the losses, waiting for spring. Spring had come, and Kor knew that Voss would come too. But the merchant arrived first, a man named Drell, short, wiry, shifty eyes, a cart pulled by a mule. He'd been traveling along the eastern road and turned toward Ashmore, following the trail of smoke. A sentry stopped him half a kilometer away, brought him to the gates. Kor met him himself. Drell looked at the village and made no attempt to hide his surprise. A moat, a wall, patrols, people who didn't look like walking corpses. He said he'd heard of Ashmore, a dead village in the Black Zone, and here it was alive, and it smelled of meat. Kor asked what he had on his cart. Drell showed him. Cloth. Coarse, cheap, but cloth. Iron, nails, staples, 2 sacks of grain, seeds, salt, sea salt, pure, better than rock salt. Kor showed him what the village had. Hides, tanned, boar and deer, smoked meat, rock salt,
and 3 hides of night stalkers. Drell saw the hides of the beasts and froze. He touched them. He stroked them. His eyes lit up. He said they'd pay 50 silver pieces for a hide like that in the capital. Kor said he had 3, and there might be more. The haggling was brief. Kor bargained like a trader in a market in a conflict zone. No emotion, exact figures, clear terms. Drell tried to drive the price down. Kor didn't budge. 3 creature hides for all the goods from the cart, plus a promise to return in a month with whatever Kor ordered. Iron, lots of it. Tools, rope, cloth, and information. Kor asked for the information separately. What's being said around here? What people are saying about the Black Zone? What people are saying about the bandits? Drell told him willingly. You can tell a lot for a creature's hide worth 50 silver. Voss is alive. His gang has shrunk to 20. 6 left after the ambush on the trail. They chickened out. The rest are angry and hungry. Voss is looking for reinforcements. He's recruiting deserters and vagabonds. By summer, he might have 40 men again. Maybe more. He hasn't forgotten about Ashmore. He hasn't forgiven them. Drell said that at the inns, Voss tells how the peasants ambushed him and that he'll return and burn the village to the ground. Kor listened. He nodded. More news. The royal tax collectors. In the spring, they tour the district, collecting taxes. Ashmore was wiped off the map 7 years ago, paid nothing. But if the rumors reach the collectors and they come, they'll see a well-fed village with supplies, and they'll demand the debt. 7 years of unpaid taxes, a sum that will crush Ashmore. Kor took in the information. 2 enemies on the horizon, Voss and his gang, the crown with its taxes, and the skinny one in the forest. 3 fronts. The operator was used to multitasking, but he had only one body. Resources were limited. He had to set priorities. First, the skinny one, the main threat. As long as he lives, the forest will spawn creatures. Every full moon is worse than the last. An endless war of attrition that the village will lose. Killing the skinny one means cutting off the source of the problem. Second, Voss, a human threat, concrete, with a specific deadline. By summer, we need to be ready. Third, the crown, a political threat, uncertain. Maybe they'll come, maybe not. Diplomacy, not his strong suit, but he'll figure it out. Kor decided to start with the skinny one. Over the winter, he gathered data, roots, lair, behavior. The active phase will begin in the spring. Preparation, gear, reconnaissance of the route, and the strike. He called Garrick, told him the plan. Not the whole plan, just part of it. He said he was going into the forest, deep in, for a few days, reconnaissance. Garrick asked why. Kor replied that there was something in the forest that drew the beasts out every full moon, and he was going to find it and destroy it. Garrick was silent. Then he asked if he could go with him. Kor said no. The village needs a leader while he's gone. Garrick commands the hunters. Tobin commands the archers. Bram runs the farm. Mara handles evacuation if things go wrong. Kor is going alone. Garrick didn't argue. He trusted Kor, completely, unconditionally. Trust built over 4 months on blood, meat, and victories. Kor began to pack. Gear for a long expedition. A knife, a small axe, a spear with a tip made from the creature's tooth, a rope. 30 meters. Pemmican for 5 days. A flask, a flint, cloth bandages, Hetter's herbal ointment for wounds. The creature's hide as a cloak, warm, durable, and the scent of musk. Maybe it will help. Maybe it will mask him among the creatures. Maybe not. He'll try. Hetter gave him a small bag of powder, dried herbs, bitter. He said that if you burn them, the smoke drives away small creatures, not the night prowlers, the little ones, insects and snakes that dwell deep in the forest. Kor took it. Any advantage in the field means survival. The evening before he left, Kor was sitting at home. Mara knew. He'd told her. Not everything. He said he was going into the forest to scout, for 3 or 4 days. She was silent for a long time. Then she asked why. He replied that as long as there was something driving the beast toward the village, there would be no peace. She asked if someone else could do it. He replied that no one could. She nodded. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She stood up and began packing food for him.
silently. Her hands moved quickly, as usual, a woman sending her husband off to war. It wasn't the first time she'd done this. Old Kor would go into the woods and didn't always come back in one piece. But this Kor is different. He comes back, always, with meat, with victory, with life. She believed in that. Kor saw. Ren approached, serious. She handed him a rope with a knot, slipping knot, a proper one. She had learned, in 3 months. Kor took the rope, looked at the knot, looked at his daughter, 6 years old, skinny. But no longer scrawny. Cheeks had appeared, eyes alive. She looked at him and waited. He said it was a good knot. She nodded. Seriously. Then she told him to come back. Kor crouched down in front of her, looked into her eyes. Said he'd come back, for sure. She hugged him, little arms around his neck, strong. The first hug. The first real hug in all those months. Kor hugged her back, light, warm, alive. His daughter, not Dalton's, not old Kor's, his. Earned, with every scrap of meat and every sleepless night on the wall. Mara stood nearby and watched. Her eyes were shining. Kor stood up, kissed Mara, briefly, took the bag, the spear, left the house. Dawn. The cold air of a spring morning, the smell of melting snow and fresh earth. Kor walked through the gate. Garrick stood at the exit, silent. He nodded. Kor nodded back. 2 men who didn't need words. He entered the forest. Familiar trails. He covered the first 2 kilometers quickly. Traps, marked trees, his territory. Then the trails ended. Beyond that lay a forest he didn't know. The deep forest. Dark, dense, older trees, thicker trunks, denser canopies. Light barely penetrated. Kor headed southwest, following the map in his head, following the routes he'd mapped out over the winter. Skinny's trail led here, 7 kilometers from the village, a 4-hour trek through the windbreak. He walked quietly, just as he'd been taught, foot on the toe, weight distributed smoothly, breathing even. The creature's hide on his shoulders, the scent of musk. He had become part of the forest, another shadow among the trees. After 3 kilometers, he spotted the first sign. The trees had changed. The bark had grown darker, almost black. Growths were sprouting from the trunks, bumpy, moist, like tumors. The smell was sweet and rotten, not strong, just in the background, but it was there. The moss on the ground was different too, not green, gray, soft as cotton. His feet sank into it. Kor kept walking. The sounds of the forest were changing. The birds fell silent. First the distant ones, then the nearby ones. By the 4th kilometer, he was walking in silence. Complete, absolute. No wind, no birds, no rustling. Only his footsteps on the gray moss. The 5th kilometer. The trees grew sparser, but not because the forest was thinning, because the trees were dying. The trunks stood, but the crowns were bare. The branches were dry, brittle. A dead forest. At the 6th kilometer, he found Skinny's trail. Not a footprint on the ground, a trail, a path 1 meter wide. The trees along it were bent, the branches snapped off at a height of 3 meters. Skinny had passed through here regularly, often enough to wear a path. Kor walked along the trail, carefully. Every step was deliberate. He didn't know what lay ahead. He didn't know the enemy's size for sure, didn't know its abilities, didn't know if it could be killed. He was going to gather data, not to fight. At the 7th kilometer, the trail led to a low-lying area, a ravine, wide, 20 meters, deep, 5 meters. Something white at the bottom. Kor lay down on the edge and looked down. Bones. The bottom of the ravine was littered with bones. Animal bones, large and small. Boar skulls, deer ribs, the vertebrae of something long, and among them, smaller bones. Human. Kor recognized a femur, a skull, small, a child's. He looked away, looked again, professionally, without emotion. He counted. Dozens of skeletons, maybe hundreds. Years. The skinny one had been dumping the remains of his prey here, or his creatures had brought them. A feeding trough, a trash can, a lair nearby. Kor crawled along the edge of the ravine, quietly, on his stomach. 100 meters away, he saw it. A cave, not natural, dug out. The entrance in the hillside, wide, 3 meters, tall. The ground around the entrance was trampled down to the rock. The smell from the cave washed over him in a wave. Sweet rot, thick,
Tangible. Kor pressed his face against his sleeve. He breathed through the fabric. His eyes watered. The entrance was dark. He couldn't see anything inside. Kor lay on the edge of the ravine and watched. He didn't move. He waited. An hour. 2. The sun moved across the sky. The shadows shifted. Nothing came out of the cave. The skinny guy was inside. Or he'd left another way. Kor wouldn't go inside. Not now. Not alone. Not without preparation. He remembered everything. The layout, the approaches, the size of the entrance, the ravine with the bones, the distance from the village, the route. He turned around and crawled back, quietly, slowly. After a kilometer, he stood up. He walked, faster, away from the dead zone, toward the living forest, toward the birds, toward the sounds. 4 hours later, he was on familiar trails. 5 hours later, at the village. Garrick met him at the gate. Kor went inside. He went to Heder, sat down by his hearth, told him everything. The cave, the ravine, the bones, the smell. Heder listened, nodded, then asked what Kor was going to do. Kor answered with one word: prepare. Kor prepared for 3 weeks. Every day he went into the forest and worked on the route to Skinny's lair. Not alone, with Garrick and Tobin. Tobin had recovered from his wound. His shoulder still ached, but he held his arm steady. The guy had toughened up after his injury. His eyes were calmer, his movements more precise. Pain teaches better than any instructor. Kor broke the route down into 3 stages. The first stage was from the village to the border of the dead zone, 4 kilometers. A familiar forest, their own trails, safe. The second stage was from the border to the ravine with the bones, 3 kilometers through the dead forest. Dangerous, silent, no cover from sounds. Every step could be heard. The third stage was the ravine and the approach to the cave, the most dangerous part. During the second stage, Kor began building, not traps for animals, combat traps, for the skinny one. He didn't know the creature's exact dimensions, but he knew its weight, 300 kilograms minimum. He knew its height, 3 meters by the broken branches. He knew the creature was smart. So the trap had to be one that a smart creature wouldn't see. The first trap was at the 5-kilometer mark, a pit, 2 meters deep, 1 meter wide, on Skinny's trail. The 3 of them dug for 2 days. They carried the dirt away in sacks so as not to leave any traces. The bottom of the pit was studded with spikes, not wooden ones, iron ones. Bram forged 12 spikes from captured swords, thick, sharp. A creature weighing 300 kilos would run into them and get stuck. We covered the pit with poles and moss, gray moss from the dead zone, perfect camouflage, indistinguishable from the ground. The second trap is 200 meters away, a tripwire, not a warning one, a combat one. 2 sharpened logs suspended on ropes between trees. The creature touches the tripwire, the rope releases the latch, the logs strike from both sides. At a height of 3 meters, at the height of Skinny's torso. The force of the impact is enough to break a boar's ribs. Whether it's enough for Skinny is unknown, but it will slow him down. The third trap is right at the ravine, a net. Kor spent a week weaving it, from boar sinew and rope, sturdy, stretched between 4 trees above the trail, at a height of 4 meters. It drops on command. The tension line is on the ground. The beast advances. The net falls from above. It entangles it. It buys time. 3 traps at 3 points, a staggered system. If the first one doesn't work, the second will. If the second doesn't stop it, the third will. And behind the third, Kor will be standing with a spear and a crossbow. Kor took the crossbow from Garrick the crossbow for the duration of the operation. He gave him the best bow with claw-tipped arrows. Garrick didn't argue. The crossbow packs a bigger punch, Against the skinny one, you need power, not rate of fire. Kor crafted special bolts. Longer than usual, the tips are made from the claws of night stalkers. 3 claws soldered together on an iron rod. Bram toiled over it for 2 days. The result was crude, but deadly. A bolt could pierce a log right through. 6 such bolts. 6 shots. That's all there would be. At the same time, Kor was sorting things out with Voss. The information from Drell was being updated. The merchant arrived for the second, as promised. He brought iron, cloth, grain. He took the hides and smoked meat, and he shared the news. Voss had gathered 35 men. He'd recruited mercenaries. 2 of them were former soldiers, with real combat experience. Voss is waiting for the start of summer, when the roads dry out and he can lead his squad without leaving muddy tracks. Kor calculated. 3 weeks until summer, 3 weeks until Voss, and Skinny in the forest. 2 fronts at once. You can't fight on 2 fronts, so one must be closed before the second opens. Kor decided to go after Skinny now, before Voss. Close off the forest, then close off the road. He chose the night, full moon. Sounds crazy, to go to Skinny's lair when his beasts are out hunting, but Kor thought otherwise. On a full moon, the beasts leave the lair, toward the village, toward other villages if there are any. The lair empties out. Skinny is left alone. If the village holds the beasts at the perimeter and Kor strikes the lair at that moment, then Skinny will be left without his retinue, alone, facing traps and a crossbowman. The risk is enormous, but Kor has worked with enormous risks his whole life. The difference between madness and calculation lies in preparation. A madman runs into a cave with a torch. The crossbowman plans the route for 3 weeks, sets 3 lines of traps, and strikes from an ambush. He gathered the people, explained. Garrick commands the defense during the full moon. Tobin is his deputy. Bram handles the rear. Mara handles evacuation. Kor goes into the forest. Alone. After Skinny. Silence. Garrick asked if he was alone. Kor answered yes. Tobin said it was suicide. Kor replied that suicide was waiting for Skinny to send 20 beasts at once and break through the defense. Heder was silent. Then he said Kor was right. The forest had called him for this. Mara said nothing in front of the others. That evening at home, she stood by the hearth and said nothing. Kor was packing his gear. A bag, a crossbow, 6 bolts, a spear, a knife, an axe, a rope, pemmican, water, a flint, torches, 3 of them, wrapped in tarred cloth, for the cave. Mara approached, stood beside him, said that if he didn't come back, she would raise Ren on her own. Kor looked at her. She wasn't crying, didn't ask him to stay, spoke as if it were a fact, like a contingency plan. He said he'd come back. She said she knew, but just in case. He nodded, just in case. Ren was asleep. Kor walked over, looked at her, a rag doll in her hands, cheeks round, breathing evenly, sleeping peacefully, not twitching in her sleep like she used to. He leaned down and kissed the top of her head. Her hair smelled of smoke and something childlike. Kor straightened up, turned to Mara, kissed her, long and hard. She hugged him, tightly. Her arms were strong, calloused, warm. Then she let go. He picked up the bag and left. Night. The moon was rising, round, white. Full moon in 3 hours. Kor walked through the gate. Garrick was standing on the wall. He didn't have a crossbow, a bow, and 30 arrows. The guy nodded. Kor nodded back and walked off into the darkness. Kor walked through the forest in the dark. The moon cast light through the treetops, white spots on the black earth. He walked quickly, familiar paths. The first 4 kilometers in an hour and a half. His feet remembered every route, every stone, every turn. At the edge of the dead zone, he stopped. He listened. Far behind him, near the village, a sound reached his ears. Faint, high-pitched. The screech of creatures. The full moon had begun. They were heading for Ashmore. Garrick would meet them. Kor turned and walked on. The dead zone. The silence thickened. No birds, no rustling, only his footsteps on the gray moss. The moon shone brighter here. The dead tree crowns didn't block the light. Bare branches stood like skeletons against the white sky. Kor followed the route, past the first trap.
The pit is camouflaged. Not even he can see it. Good. Past the second. Logs hang in the shadows between the trunks. Ropes are taut. The traps are in place. Past the third. A net over the path, invisible in the dark. He passed all 3 lines and came out to the ravine. Bones below glowed white in the moonlight. Skulls stared up with empty eye sockets. Kor didn't look at them. He looked at the cave. The entrance was dark. A smell wafted from it, stronger than during the day. Sweet rot. Thick. Almost visible, like fog. Kor wrapped a cloth around his face. He breathed through it. His eyes watered. He took out a torch. He didn't light it. Not yet. He lay down at the edge of the ravine. He watched. He waited. It was quiet in the cave, but Kor could sense it. Something was there. Big. Alive. Breathing. The air from the cave came in waves. Inhale, exhale. Rhythmic. Slow. The creature was breathing. Kor assessed the situation. It was Skinny inside, asleep or resting. The creatures had gone hunting. It was alone. For now. Kor climbed down into the ravine, quietly, along the wall. Bones crunched under his feet. He walked over the bones of the dead toward the cave entrance, every step controlled, every breath through the fabric. He stopped at the entrance. The darkness inside was absolute, not a glimmer. The cave went down, a sloping passage, wide. The walls were wet, earth and clay. Kor lit the torch. The fire flared up. Shadows darted across the walls. He saw the passage. 3 meters wide, 2.5 meters high. The walls were covered with something. Slime. Dark. Shiny. Growths on the walls like in a forest. Bumpy. Pulsating. Alive. The cave was alive. Kor walked down the passage, crossbow in his right hand, torch in his left, spear on a strap behind his back. 10 meters. 20. The passage widened, the ceiling rose, the cave became a hall. Kor raised the torch, light fell on the walls, on the ceiling, and on Skinny. Kor saw him and stopped. His body was on autopilot, his legs froze, his breathing stopped. His eyes locked onto the target, his brain processed the data. The Skinny one lay in the center of the hall, or rather, he wasn't lying down, he was part of the floor. His body was sprawled out, long, 5 meters from head to tail, not 3, 5. Slender, elongated, long limbs, 6 legs, not 4, 6. Each ended in a cluster of claws like needles. The head was flat, wide. No eyes, or the eyes were hidden. The mouth was closed. The skin wasn't skin. Something between skin and tree bark. Gray, bumpy, covered in growths like the walls. It was part of the cave. The cave was part of it. The growths on the walls are it, its body, its roots, its network. It didn't just live in the cave, he had grown into it. Skinny, not a predator. Skinny, a parasite, a fungus, or something like a fungus, alive, ancient. The network of growths is his nervous system, or his digestive system, or both. The creatures in the forest are infected by him, his spores, his poison, his influence. He changed them because they are part of him, an extension, tentacles, hunters who bring prey to their master. Kor stood and watched. The operator inside was calculating. 5 meters, 300 kilograms, 6 legs, no eyes. It had burrowed into the cave. Is it vulnerable? Yes. All living things are vulnerable. Where? The head, the neck, if there is one, where the body meets the ground. The roots. Pull out the roots, and the creature will lose its footing. It will lose its connection to the cave. It will become just meat. Big, heavy, dangerous, but just meat. Kor raised his crossbow, took aim, at the head. Flat, wide, 10 meters away, impossible to miss. He fired. The bolt flew out with a whine. The clawed tip struck Skinny's skull. It went in, deep. The full length of the tip. Skinny jerked. The whole hall jerked. The walls shook. The growths on the pulsed. A sound burst from Skinny's maw. Not a roar, not a screech. A low hum. A vibration. Core felt it in his bones. His teeth ached. His head buzzed. Nausea hit him. He held his ground. He reloaded the crossbow. 3 seconds. His hands moved on autopilot. The skinny one was rising, slowly. Its body was tearing away from the floor. The roots were snapping, squelching. Black slime oozed from the tears. The creature turned. Its head swiveled toward Core, eyeless, but it saw him, felt him. Its maw opened. No teeth. Instead, rows of needles. Thin, long, like claws on its feet. A stench burst from its mouth that nearly made Core faint. Concentrated rot. Poison. A weapon. Core fired. The second bolt. Into the maw. The tip pierced the soft palate. The skinny one twitched. The rumbling grew louder. The walls of the hall crumbled. Clumps of earth fell from the ceiling. Core retreated toward the exit. 2 steps. The skinny one moved. Faster than Core had expected. Too fast for such a mass, for such a body. 6 legs carried it forward. The claw-like scraped the ground. The body flowed like liquid. No jerks. Smoothly. Deadly smoothly. Core turned and ran, upward, toward the exit. Behind him, a sloshing and a grinding. The skinny one was following. In the passage. Too narrow for him. He squeezed through. The walls creaked. Growths burst. Slime flowed. Core leaped out of the cave into the ravine. Bones underfoot. He jumped onto the ravine wall. Upward. Claws dug into the ground. Arms pulled his body up. The crossbow on his back. The torch discarded below. It burns on the bones. He made it to the edge of the ravine. He turned around. The skinny one was coming out of the cave, in the moonlight. Core saw him in full. 5 meters of gray, bumpy body, 6 legs spread out, head raised, 2 bolts sticking out, 1 in the skull, 1 in the mouth. Black slime flowing. He's wounded, but alive, and angry. The skinny one scrambled up the ravine wall. Needle claws dug into the ground like nails. He was climbing fast. Core ran, down the trail, toward his traps. Behind him, a grinding and sloshing. The skinny one was on the surface. He was coming, fast. Core ran. Branches lashed his face. Gray moss squelched under his feet. 100 meters, 200. The net. The third trap. Core leaped over the tripwire, landed, rolled, turned around. The skinny one was walking along the path, straight into the net. His front leg stepped on the tripwire. A click. The ropes released. The net fell from above. Covered him. The skinny one lunged. The net of sinew and rope wrapped around him. Needle-like claws tore at the threads. 1 by 1. Core reloaded the crossbow. Fired. Point. 10 meters. In the side. The bolt went in deep. Skinny howled. A thud rang in his ears. Core staggered. He steadied himself. He reloaded. He fired. The 4th shot. In the neck. A direct hit. The skinny one thrashed in the net, tearing at it. Half the threads were torn. It would break free in seconds. Core ran on. 200 meters. The second trap. Logs. He ran past it. He turned around. The skinny one had torn through the net. It was coming after him. Point. 4 bolts in its body. Black slime on the ground. But it kept going. The creature stepped onto the line of the second trap. Its front leg caught the rope. The latches released. 2 logs slammed down from the sides, simultaneously. A crunch. The skinny one staggered. One of its 6 legs buckled. Broken. Core reloaded. The 5th bolt. He fired at the fallen creature. In the head. Next to the first bolt. It went in. The skinny one slammed its snout into the ground. Got up. On 5 legs. The 6th one was dragging itself along. It was still coming. Core cursed. Under his breath. He turned and ran. 200 meters. The last trap. A pit. Core skirted around the edge. He knew where it was safe. He stood behind the pit, facing the trail. The last bolt in the crossbow. A spear in his left hand. The skinny one emerged from the darkness. On 5 legs. Slowly. 5 bolts in its body. A broken leg. Slime on the ground, a black trail. But it had no eyes, and its head was looking straight at Core. It sensed him. The skinny one stepped onto the camouflaged pit. The moss and poles held his first foot. They didn't hold the second. They gave way. The skinny one crashed down. 300 kilograms on 12 iron stakes. The sound was wet and heavy, a crunch and a squelch at the same time. The skinny one howled. A rumble pierced the ground. Core felt the ground tremble beneath his feet. He walked to the edge of the pit. He looked down. The skinny one lay on the stakes. 4 spikes had gone through his body, 1 through his head. Black slime flooded the bottom of the pit. The creature twitched. Its legs scraped against the walls. Its needle-like claws crumbled the earth. But it couldn't get out. Impaled. Core raised the crossbow. The last bolt. He aimed down, at the base of the skull, where the spine is, if there is one. He fired. The bolt went in. The skinny one twitched. Hard. All of it. Then it went limp. Its legs stopped scraping. Its head fell. The rumbling subsided. Silence. Complete. Absolute. Core stood at the edge of the pit and looked down. 5 meters of dead creature on iron spikes in the pit. 6 bolts in its body. A broken leg. A pierced skull. Dead. He lowered the crossbow. His hands were shaking. Now. After. The adrenaline was wearing off. His legs felt like cotton. He sat down on the ground, breathing. Deeply. Evenly. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. He sat for a minute. 2. Then he stood up. He took a torch from his bag, the last one, lit it, climbed down into the pit, examined the creature. Dead. Definitely. The growths on its body were still pulsing, faintly, fading, like a nervous system that hadn't yet realized its master was dead. Core climbed back up. He walked back along the trail, past the shattered gyek, past the torn net, past the broken logs, toward the village, through the dead forest, through the living forest. By dawn he had reached familiar paths. Birds were singing. Core walked and listened. Maybe it was his imagination, or maybe there were more birds, louder. The forest breathed differently, more lightly. Maybe it was his imagination. Maybe not. Core emerged from the forest at dawn. The field in front of the village was trampled. Animal tracks in the mud, arrows stuck in the ground, dark spots of blood on the remaining snow. It was a full moon, and the village stood. The palisade was intact. The moat held. Garrick stood on the wall. He saw Core. He didn't shout. He just exhaled. Core approached the gate. Garrick opened it. He stood before him and watched. Core was dirty, covered in black slime, covered in blood, his own and others. His jacket was torn. His face was scratched by branches, but alive. Garrick asked with a single word. Core nodded. Done. Garrick closed his eyes for a second. Then he opened them and reported. The night had been rough. 10 creatures had come, more than ever before. 2 large ones. The rest were standard night prowlers. The village held out for 4 hours. The archers used up their entire supply of ammunition. Every arrow, every bolt. Garrick shot his bow until the last arrow, then took a captured sword and stood at the breach. Tobin fought hand to hand. Second wound. Leg. Not deep. He's walking. 3 militiamen were wounded. 1 seriously. Core will examine him. But everyone is alive. Everyone. 10 creatures. 7 killed. 3 got away. Wounded. Not a single human casualty. Core listened. Nodded. Good. You did a good job. Garrick paused, then said that something changed in the 3rd hour of the battle. The creatures seemed to weaken. They became uncertain, lost their coordination. One of the larger ones just stopped in the middle of an attack, stood there, swaying, like a drunk. They shot her while she was standing. Core listened. The 3rd hour. Around that time, he killed the skinny one. The creature in the cave died, and its influence over the servants was cut off. The connection was severed. The night wanderers, without a master, became mere beasts. Large, dangerous, but merely beasts. Without coordination, without tactics, without the mind that made them more terrifying.
Kor went to the wounded, the seriously injured one first, a man named Dor, 40 years old. The creature had clawed him in the stomach. The wound was long but shallow. His intestines were intact. Kor cleaned it, stitched it up. Applied header ointment. Bandaged it. He'll live. The scar will remain. Then Tobin, his leg. A laceration on his thigh. The muscle was partially torn. Kor stitched it up. Tobin sat there and said nothing. Didn't flinch. Used to the pain. Then 3 light cases. Cuts, bruises, nothing serious. Kor treated them all. Field medicine. Routine. After that, he went home. Mara was standing in the doorway, Ren beside her. Both were looking at him. Kor approached. Mara hugged him, silently, tightly. Ren clung to his leg. He stood there, stinking, slime-covered carcass of a dead monster, and 2 women were holding him as if he might vanish. He didn't vanish. He went inside, sat by the hearth. Mara brought water, warm. He washed up, ate, boiled meat and broth, the taste of home. Then he lay down on the bed, closed his eyes, and fell asleep. Slept for 16 hours. Mara didn't wake him. Neither did Ren. When he opened his eyes, dawn was breaking outside the window. His body ached, every muscle, every joint. But his head was clear. He got up, went outside. Morning, warm, spring-like. The birds were singing loudly, very loudly. Kor stood in the doorway and listened. It wasn't his imagination. The birds were singing louder, more. The forest sounded different. In 2 days, something was changing. Heder arrived around noon. His face was pale. He said he had gone to the border of the dead zone. The border had shifted by 1/2 kilometer. The dead trees still stood, but the gray moss had begun to dry out, twisting, turning black, dying. The growths on the trunks, too. They were drying up and crumbling. The forest was cleansing itself. Kor listened. The skinny one is dead, and his influence is fading, like poison that's being blown away. The forest will heal. It will take a long time, maybe a year, maybe 2, but it will. Heder said the next full moon would tell. If there are no creatures, or few, then the source is dead. Kor nodded. We'll wait. He didn't wait long. He didn't have time. Voss was on the horizon. 3 weeks had passed. Summer had arrived. The roads had dried out, and Drell brought news. Voss had set out, 35 men, heading for Ashmore. They'd be here in 3 days. Kor gathered his men, 12 hunters, Bram, Heder, Mara. That's it. He laid out the situation. 35 bandits, armed, 2 former soldiers. Voss is an experienced sergeant, no fool. After 2 defeats, he won't charge head-on. He'll prepare, reconnaissance, flanking, a night attack, fire. Voss knows about the ditch, knows about the snipers, knows about the ambushes on the trails. He'll be waiting for something else. Kor gave him something else, not a defense, not an ambush on the trail, something else. He spent 3 days preparing the operation. During the day, he worked with the men. At night, he planned. A map of the terrain in his head, every rock, every tree, every ravine. Voss will take the eastern road, the only route for a group of 35 men. The trails through the forest aren't suitable for such a unit. The road. Kor chose the spot. Not on the road, nearby. A clearing 2 kilometers east of the village. The road runs along the edge, forest on 3 sides, open field on the 4th. Kor wasn't going to attack. He was going to take the fight, on his own terms. He turned the clearing into a trap. Not just one, a system. He positioned archers along the forest perimeter around the clearing, 6 of them, in the trees, up high. Garrick was in the main position, with a crossbow, a new bowstring, new bolts. In the clearing were 4 pit traps, shallow, knee-deep, camouflaged. They wouldn't kill, they'd slow you down. A person steps into a pit and falls. A second on the ground means an arrow in the back. On the approach to the clearing from the road, tripwires. Not warning ones, combat ones. Sharpened stakes on springy branches. A person touches the rope, the branch snaps straight. The stake strikes at chest level. Doesn't always kill, but always takes you out of action.
Kor set up 8 of these, on both sides of the road. A death zone. 30 meters of road turned into a corridor of traps. Voss will lead the men down the road. They'll enter the corridor. The first traps will spring. Panic. Screams. The squad will scatter from the road into the woods. Archers in the woods. Arrows from the darkness. The panic will intensify. The squad will run into the clearing, an open space, seemingly safe. Pits in the clearing. They fall. Arrows from the trees. And in the center of the clearing stands Kor, with a torch. Alone. Visible. The target Voss will go for. Because Voss cannot afford to retreat. Retreating from a peasant village a third time would be the end of his authority. He will go for Kor. And Kor is waiting for him. This isn't a defense plan. It's a hunt. Kor is the bait. Kor is the trap. And Kor is the hunter. All at once. That evening he was sitting at home. The last evening. Tomorrow, Voss. Rim was playing with a rag doll. Mara was cooking dinner. Quiet. Calm. A cozy evening at home. Kor watched them and thought that tomorrow might be the last time. No, it can't be. It won't be. He'll come back. He always comes back. The operator doesn't promise. The operator delivers. Voss arrived on the 4th day, not on the 3rd as Kor had expected. He was delayed. Maybe reconnaissance, maybe caution. The lookout boy ran up in the morning. Strangers on the road. Lots of them. Kor nodded. He went. Took his position. The archers were already in the trees. Garrick at the main vantage point. Crossbow loaded. Tobin with a bow on the left flank. His leg bandaged. He stands. He shoots. He'll manage. 4 others in the woods on both sides of the road. 6 men with spears and swords in ambush behind the clearing. The reserve. Kor stood in the clearing. A trophy sword at his belt. A knife behind his back. A spear in his hand. A torch stuck in the ground nearby. Unlit. Daytime. Light. No need for a torch. He waited. Noise on the road appeared an hour later. Voices. The clang of metal. Footsteps. Many footsteps. Kor stood and listened. They were walking along the road. In a column. Not in formation. A crowd. Bandits aren't soldiers. They don't know how to march in formation. That's a plus. A crowd panics faster than a formation. The first tripwire went off. A crack. A scream. The stake struck someone. Judging by the scream, it hit. The column stopped. Screams. Cursing. Voss's voice. Loud. Angry. Ordering them to move, not to stop. Movement resumed. More cautiously. Slower. The second tripwire. Another scream. A different voice. Higher pitched. Younger. Hit. The column stopped again. Now the screams were louder. Panic was setting in. Voss was yelling, ordering them not to touch the ropes, to watch their step, to move along the edge of the road. They veered off the road, into the woods. Arrows from the darkness. 3 at once. 2 hits. Screams. An arrow in a tree next to someone's head. The bandits rushed back onto the road. A third snare. Another one. A fourth. It was a corridor of death, and it was working. Voss realized it, quickly. He gave the order. Forward, through the corridor. Run. Don't stop. The bandits ran. Along the road, through the traps. 2 more were hit, but the main group made it through. They burst out into the clearing, in open space. No trees, no visible traps. Safe. They stopped. They caught their breath. They counted the wounded. Kor stood in the center of the clearing, alone, calm, a sword at his belt, a spear in his hand. He looked at them. 35 had made it. 6 wounded in the corridor, 2 of them seriously, out of the fight. 29 combat ready, against 1 man in the clearing. Voss stepped forward. Kor saw him for the first time. 44 years old, big, not fat, muscular, a hard face, scars, a broken nose, intelligent eyes, cold. A former sergeant, you could tell. His posture, his gait, the way he held his sword. A professional, not a peasant with a pitchfork, a soldier. Voss looked at Kor, a single man with a spear in the center of the field. He laughed, briefly, maliciously. He said that this, then, was the very peasant who had taken down his men twice.
Kor didn't answer. He waited. Voss ordered his men to take him. 5 of them moved forward. They spread out in a semicircle, swords at the ready. They walked confidently, 5 against 1. The first stepped into a pit, knee-deep. His foot gave way. He lurched forward. An arrow from the trees struck him in the back. He fell. The 4 froze. They looked up, into the trees. A second arrow. A crossbow bolt. Garrick. Into the chest of the second man, through the leather breastplate. The man collapsed. 3 ran back to their group. Arrows from the woods. 2. 1 hit. In the leg. Panic. The bandits huddled together. In the center of the clearing, the worst thing they could do. A crowd of people is one big target. Arrows came from 3 sides. Garrick shot with precision. Bolt after bolt. Reload. 4 seconds. A shot. A hit. Reload. Tobin shot faster. A bow. 3 arrows a minute. Not all of them hit, but at that distance, misses were rare. Kor stood and watched. He didn't intervene. No need. The archers were doing their job. The traps were working. The plan was working. Voss realized the clearing was a trap. He gave the order to retreat. Back, toward the road. The bandits ran. Through the pits. 2 fell. Arrows from above. 2 more. Kor moved, cut off their retreat. Stood at the edge of the clearing, between the bandits and the road. Alone. Spear in hand, sword at his belt. Voss saw him. Stopped. He looked at Kor, at the man standing between him and the exit. Alone, against what remained of his squad. Of the 35 combat-ready men, perhaps 20 remained. Maybe fewer. Wounded, frightened, demoralized. The arrows from the forest ceased. Kor whistled.
A signal to cease fire. Silence.
Voss stood 10 paces away, sword in hand, heavy breathing, eyes wild. Kor spoke, calmly, quietly, as if in negotiations. He said that Voss could turn around and leave, with those who could walk, to take the wounded, to head east, not to return. Ever. Ashmore was not his territory, had never been and never would be. If he returned, next time, Kor would not speak. Voss stood and listened. His face was stony. Pride wrestled with reality. Reality was simple. His squad lay in the clearing, the living and the dead. Archers in the trees waited for orders. 1 man with a spear stood before him and offered life. Voss was a sergeant. He knew how to count the casualties. He knew how to assess the situation. He knew when a battle was lost. He lowered his sword, slowly. He stuck it in the ground. He looked at Kor. He said he would remember this. Kor replied that he was counting on it. Voss turned around. He gave the order. Gather the wounded, leave. The bandits were gathering their own. Those who could walk were lifted up. Those who couldn't were dragged. Kor stood and watched. He didn't interfere. 6 archers in the trees held their bows at the ready. Garrick's crossbow was aimed. 1 sound and the arrows would fly. But Kor had given his word. If they're leaving, then they're leaving. Voss led his men away, down the road, eastward, slowly, limping, dragging the wounded. 35 had come. 18 had left. 6 of them were wounded, left behind in the clearing. Kor counted. 7 bodies. 3 more would likely die from their wounds on the way. 10 in total. The village's losses. 0. Not a single casualty. Not a single wounded. A clean victory. A special operation from start to finish. Reconnaissance. Preparation. Traps. Ambush. Suppressive fire. Psychological pressure. Negotiations. The enemy's retreat. Textbook. Kor stood in the clearing and watched the road along which Voss was leaving. He didn't feel victory. He felt exhaustion. Deep. Bone deep. He'd been doing this for 12 years, killing people, planning murders, carrying them out. In his past life, for money and orders. In this one, for his family and the village. There is a difference. But his hands are just as dirty. He gathered the spoils. Swords, crossbows, 2 new ones, 5 in total for the village. Leather breastplates, knives, silver,
Lots of it. The bandits had money, looted. Now Ashmore's money. Kor handed the silver to Bram for the village's needs. Tools, seeds, livestock, when the merchant arrives. Garrett climbed down from the tree. He walked over to Kor. He stood nearby. He was silent. Then he said that Kor could have killed Voss. Kor replied that he could have. Garrett asked why he hadn't killed him. Kor replied that a dead Voss would be a martyr around whom new bandits would gather. A living Voss who had lost 3 times to a peasant village was a disgrace everyone would avoid. No one would follow a loser. Garrick thought. He nodded. He understood. They went home. To the village, across the field, through the gate, past the moat, past the wall. Home. Mara was waiting at the threshold. Ren was beside her. Kor approached. He knelt down in front of his daughter. He looked into her eyes. She touched his face. Dirty, tired, but unharmed. She smiled. Widely. The first real smile he had seen. Not a shadow of a smile. Not a hint. A real one. Teeth. Dimples on her cheeks. Childlike. Alive. Kor lifted her into his arms. Hugged her close. She wrapped her arms around his neck. Tightly. Warm. Alive. His. A year had passed. Kor stood on the wall he had built and looked out at Ashmore. The village below was alive. Truly alive. Not just surviving. The houses had been repaired. The roofs were new. The walls were insulated. Smoke rose from every chimney. Not smoke from smokehouses. Smoke from hearths where normal food was being cooked. Drell had brought grain in the spring, then again in the summer. The fields beyond the western wall were sown. The first harvest was modest, but it was there. Barley, turnips, peas. Mara organized the planting. The women worked in the fields from dawn to dusk. The men hunted in the morning and helped in the fields after lunch. Everyone is busy. Everyone is needed. Everyone eats twice a day. Kor climbed down from the wall and walked through the village. The street has been packed down. The mud has been cleared away. Drainage ditches on either side. His idea. Simple. But the village no longer drowns in mud after the rains. At the smithy, Bram was hammering away. Steadily. Rhythmically. He was making hinges for the new gate. The second gate. The northern one. Kor had cut a passage through the ravine to the north. A bridge over the ravine. A gate. A second way out of the village. An evacuation route. And a trade route. Now Ashmore could be entered from 2 sides. Drell used to come every month. Then he started coming twice a month. Then he brought another merchant. The creature hides had run out. No new creatures were coming. The last full moon after Skinny's death was quiet. 3 small beasts emerged from the forest. Not night prowlers, ordinary predators. Large, dangerous. But without that terrifying intelligence, without coordination, without tactics. They were shot down from the wall in a minute. The next full moon passed without any attacks at all. The forest was recovering. The dead zone was receding. Over the course of a year, it had shrunk by half. The gray moss had disappeared. The growths on the trees had crumbled away. Young shoots were pushing through between the dead trunks. In 2 years, the dead forest would be overgrown. In 5 years, there won't be a trace left. Heder went into the forest every week. He watched. He returned and reported to Kor. The grasses had returned. The ones that grew 30 years ago, before the skinny one. Berries. Mushrooms. The forest was giving back what it had taken 7 years ago. Trade was flourishing. Skins of common animals, smoked meat, salt, honey. Kor found wild beehives in the forest and hauled 3 back to the village. Mara set up an apiary. Honey worth its weight in silver. Money flowed into the village. Iron, tools, cloth, seeds, goats. Drell brought 5 goats. Milk, cheese. The children drank milk. For the first time in their lives, some of them. The royal tax collectors arrived in the middle of summer. 2 of them, on horseback, armed, with papers. Kor met them at the gate, calmly, without hostility, invited them inside, fed them, gave them drink, showed them the village. They looked at the moat and the walls and the hunters with crossbows and didn't understand what they were seeing. A village crossed off the map 7 years ago. A dead zone.
a black mark from the Hunters Guild. And here were well-fed people and a fortified perimeter and a smithy and smokehouses and fields. The senior tax collector pulled out the papers. 7 years of unpaid taxes, a sum that would have crushed Ashmore a year ago. Cor looked at the papers, then at the tax collector. He calmly explained the situation. The village had been abandoned, struck off the maps. For 7 years, the kingdom hadn't sent guards, hadn't repaired the roads, hadn't helped. The village had survived on its own, built its own defenses, cleared the forest itself. Cor proposed a deal. Ashmore would pay the current tax, starting this year. The debt would be written off. In return, the village would ensure the safety of the eastern route, the trade route through the former Black Zone. No one used to travel here. Now they do. Thanks to Ashmore. It's worth 7 years of taxes. The tax collector thought, for a long time. Then he looked at the walls, at the hunters, at the crossbows, at the faces of the men who killed monsters and bandits and weren't particularly afraid of 2 officials. He agreed. Signed the paper. Ashmore returned to the kingdom's map. Officially. Alive. Paying. Protected. A second year passed, then a third. Cor stood on the wall he had built. Tall, sturdy. Not a palisade made of rotten logs. A wall. A stone foundation. A log top. A deep and wide moat. A drawbridge at the main gate. Bram built it, the blacksmith's hands and Cor's mind, together. The village lived below, not 80 souls, 120. People came, from neighboring dying villages, from the towns along the road. Rumors spread. Ashmore, a place where they feed you, where the walls are strong, where the hunters know how to shoot, where the village head is a former blacksmith and the chief hunter is that very same Cor who cleared the dark forest. Cor wasn't the village head. He gave that role to Bram, officially. Bram was in charge. He ruled well, firmly, fairly. Cor commanded the hunters and the defense. Garrick had risen to become the commander of the rifle squad, 22 years old. Broad-shouldered, calm, the best marksman in the county, maybe the best in the kingdom. The crossbow in his hands was an extension of his body. Tobin commanded the infantry, 20 years old, quick, tough, 2 scars. Shoulder and hip. He wore them with pride. The 12 hunters became 20. New ones arrived, and Cor trained them as he had trained the first, quietly, patiently, methodically. Traps, ambushes, silence, patience, discipline. Not an army, but the best militia the eastern route had ever seen. Voss didn't return. Rumors said his gang had fallen apart. 2 former soldiers left, then 5 more, then more. No one needs a defeated captain. Voss vanished. Maybe he drank himself to death at some inn. He went to another province. Cor didn't care. The threat was over. The forest had changed. The dark grove was no longer dark. The trees stood tall and old, but light filtered through them. The undergrowth was green. Berries grew, mushrooms, wild apple trees on the western edge. The beasts had returned. Normal, healthy. Boars without mutations. Deer. Hares, foxes, even wolves, ordinary ones, not nocturnal wanderers, wolves that fear fire and flee from people. Hunters went into the forest every day and returned with game. The traps worked, but now it was possible to simply hunt, with a bow, with a spear, like normal people in a normal forest. Heder had lived to see this, 73 years. He sat by his house and looked at the forest he remembered all too well. The forest had returned. The old man rarely smiled, but now he was smiling. He said he could die in peace. Cor told him not to rush. Heder grinned and replied that he wouldn't rush. He'd wait and see. Mara, 29, had turned into 32. She had changed. No longer a thin, emaciated woman with lifeless eyes. Strong, beautiful in her own way. Her back was straight. Her hands were still calloused, but these were the hands of a mistress, not a slave. She managed the village's affairs. Provisions, trade, distribution. The women obeyed her just as Garrick obeyed Cor, unquestioningly, because she worked harder than anyone and never took more than the others. She laughed. Cor heard her laugh for the first time a month after Skinny. Quiet, hoarse, unfamiliar, as if her throat had forgotten how to do it. Then more often.
Ren told her something funny, and Mara laughed, out loud. Kor stood by the door and listened, and that feeling in his chest that the operator couldn't name tightened so much it was hard to breathe. She slept next to him every night, not on the edge of the cot, next to him, head on his shoulder, hand on his chest. She never cooked leather straps. Meat hung in the pantry, pots of grain stood there, honey in jugs, salt in sacks. Food. Real food. Plenty. Enough for months to come. And Mara slept peacefully because she knew tomorrow would be the same, and the day after, and a year from now. Ren. 6 became 9. 3 years. She had grown, stretched out, cheeks round, eyes lively, quick, smart. She ran through the village with the other children, laughed, screamed. She fought with the boys and won. She knew how to tie knots, all the ones Kor knew. She knew how to set traps, simple ones, a noose on the trail. Kor taught her, just as he promised. She knew how to shoot a small bow. Tobin made it for her, a small one, light. She could hit a sack from 20 paces, 3 out of 5. For a 9-year-old, that's a lot. Kor taught her every morning, half an hour before breakfast, archery, knots, tracks, the silence of the forest. She listened intently, memorized everything, like Garrick, stubbornly, tightly. She no longer covered her bowl with her hand. She ate calmly, confidently, like a child who knows there will be food tomorrow. And she didn't wake up at night, didn't twitch in her sleep, didn't cry silently into her pillow. She slept the way a child should sleep, soundly, warmly, safely. Kor stood on the wall, evening. The sun was setting behind the forest. The dark forest stood like a wall on the horizon. But it was no longer dark. Green. Alive. Light filtered through the treetops, and the forest glowed golden in the sunset rays. Beautiful. Ordinary. Not scary. Garrick stood nearby on the wall, silent, staring at the forest. Down by the gate, Tobin was teaching the new hunters to keep formation. His voice was sharp, commanding. From the smithy, Bram's hammer clanged, steady, rhythmic, the sound of life. Somewhere in the village, children were laughing. Kor heard Ren's voice, ringing, loud. She was arguing with a boy from the new settlers. Judging by her tone, she was winning. Mara came out of the house. She looked at the wall. She saw Kor. She raised her hand. She waved. Simply. Ordinary. A wife waving to her husband from the yard. The evening routine of a family that is no longer afraid. Kor raised his hand in response. Garrett glanced at him. He said nothing, but the corner of his mouth twitched. Almost a smile. Kor looked at the forest. Dalton Reyes. 34 years of his first life. 12 years of war. 4 continents. Operations no one would ever know about. People he had killed. People he hadn't saved. He died covering a group during an evacuation. And the forest at the edge of the world called him back. It gave him a body. It gave him a family. It gave him a village. It gave him enemies he could defeat. And he defeated them. Not with a sword, not with magic, not with strength. With his head. With traps. With tactics. With patience. With care. With meat for his hungry daughter. With a moat for the defenseless village. With an arrow for the monster in the forest. And with a quiet evening for the woman who no longer weaves belts. Kor climbed down from the wall. He walked through the village, past the smithy, past the smokehouse, past the new well, past the children playing in the mud. He went inside. Rin was sitting at the table, trying to carve a figure out of wood with a knife. It wasn't turning out well, but she was trying. Stubborn. His daughter. Mara was stirring the pot. The smell of cooked meat and herbs. Home. Warmth. Food. Family. Kor sat down by the hearth, took off his boots, stretched his legs toward the fire. Ren came over and showed him the figure, asked if it looked like a boar. Kor looked. It didn't. Not at all. He said it looked very much like one. She beamed. Mara set a bowl in front of him, full, hot. Meat, barley, herbs. He ate, slowly, peacefully. Ren ate beside him, Mara across from him. 3 people at the table. Dinner. An ordinary dinner for an ordinary family in a village that was no longer dying. Kor finished eating, leaned back against the wall, closed his eyes. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, he wasn't planning the next operation. He wasn't counting bullets. He wasn't checking the perimeter in his head. He wasn't waiting for an alarm.
For the first time in 2 lifetimes, the operator was resting. Because the mission was complete. Everyone was alive, everyone was full, everyone was home. Kor opened his eyes. He looked at Ren. She was nibbling on a piece of bread and carving her figurine, with both hands at once. He looked at Mara. She was clearing the table and quietly humming something. No words, just a melody. It was the first time he'd heard her sing. He was sitting by the hearth in the house he'd built, in the village he'd saved, next to the woman he'd fallen in love with and the daughter for whom he'd done everything. And for the first time in 2 lifetimes, Kor felt that he was home.